The boy with his father's eyes. She thought he was dead. He thought she had disappeared forever, but the child standing between them carried every secret they never meant to share, and someone had been waiting 7 years to make sure that secret died with all three of them. If this story pulls you in from the first line, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this one doesn't slow down. The rain came sideways that morning. Not the polite Seattle drizzle that tourists romanticized, not the soft gray mist that clung to Pike Place Market and made everything look like a watercolor painting someone hadn't finished. This was the other kind, the kind that rattled the aluminum awnings over storefronts and turned the gutters into fast-moving rivers and made ordinary people with ordinary lives question every choice that had brought them to stand outside in it. Serena Vale was already inside, and she was already behind. The Anchor Cafe ran on a skeleton crew Tuesday mornings, just her, the cook Darnell, who showed up 20 minutes late every single shift without apology, and a teenage dishwasher named Marcus, who moved like he was operating underwater. The morning rush was supposed to peak at 8 and die by 9:15. Today, it peaked at 7:45 and showed no sign of dying at all, because apparently everyone in a 4-block radius had decided that miserable weather and weak institutional coffee from a chain down the street were not acceptable substitutes for whatever the Anchor was doing right. Serena had been on her feet since 5:30. She refilled the table by the window without being asked, caught a dropped mug before it hit the tile, recited the day's specials to a man who proceeded to order none of them, and smiled through all of it. The specific kind of smile that required no genuine warmth, only the muscle memory of years spent keeping other people comfortable at her own expense. She was good at that. She had been good at that for a long time. The bell above the door hit at 8:47. She heard it the way she heard most things during a rush, as background information, processed and filed without conscious attention. Another customer. She was running the carafe to table 4. She'd get to them. She didn't look up. "Corner booth's open," she said, not breaking stride. "I'll be right with you." Silence behind her. That specific weight of someone not moving the way people normally moved when you told them where to sit. She registered it peripherally, finished pouring for the couple at 4, thanked them on reflex, and turned. The man standing just inside the doorway was still. Not politely still, not uncertain where to sit still. Completely, intentionally still. The way something very large and very dangerous goes still when it wants to take stock of its environment without betraying that it's doing so. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that had not come off any rack anywhere in this city. His jaw was set. His shoulders were straight in a way that had nothing to do with posture and everything to do with the particular discipline of someone who'd been trained to take up space deliberately. His eyes found her across the length of the cafe. Steel gray. Not blue that ran gray in bad light. Actual gray. Like river stones pulled from cold water, like the sky over water when weather was building. She had dreamed those eyes approximately 400 times over the course of 7 years and had woken from every single dream feeling like something had been stolen from her. The carafe in Serena's hand stopped moving. There are moments in a person's life when the architecture of everything they've built to function, every routine, every careful distance, every adaptation to a world that hadn't gone the way they'd imagined, fails simultaneously. Not gradually, all at once. Like a power grid going dark across an entire city in a single second. She was having one of those moments. Her hand was still. Her mouth was open by a fraction she wasn't aware of. The cafe noise continued around her, scraping chairs, the hiss of the espresso machine, Darnell banging something in the kitchen, but it had moved very far away, as if she were hearing it through glass. Adrian Viscari. 7 years, 3 months, and some number of days, she had stopped counting because counting had started to feel like a form of self-destruction. He was supposed to be dead. He was standing 6 feet away from her, looking like he'd never been anything but alive, and the expression on his face was nothing. That was what stopped her breathing. Not grief, not relief, not the shock she felt cracking open inside her own chest. His face was a locked room, and the key had been removed a long time ago. She would have stood there. She would have stood there and said something or said nothing or possibly just quit on the spot, walked out the back door past Darnell's station and into the alley and kept walking until the rain swallowed her, except for what happened in the space between one breath and the next. The cafe door opened again. The bell rang, and 5-year-old Noah Vale came through it at a dead run, sneakers squeaking on the wet tile, backpack bouncing, wearing a rain slicker that was approximately 2 sizes too large for his slight frame, and before Serena could process what was happening, before she could move, before she could intercept or redirect or do any of the 1,000 things a parent's nervous system wants to do when a child is heading towards something they shouldn't reach, Noah collided directly with Adrian Vescari's leg. He grabbed on. Both small hands locked around Adrian's calf like a dock line around a cleat. He looked up. He grinned the specific enormous grin of a child who has successfully surprised someone. "Daddy!" Noah said. The word landed in the middle of the cafe like something dropped from a height. The woman at table 2 stopped mid-sentence. The man at the counter put down his mug. Marcus came halfway through the kitchen door and went still. Darnell peered through the pass-through window. Everyone was looking. Serena Vale's hand finally lost its grip on the carafe. It didn't shatter. She caught it against her thigh on pure reflex, coffee sloshing over her wrist and palm, the heat sharp and immediate. She barely registered it. She was watching Adrian Vescari's face, watching for the thing she most dreaded, watching for recognition or confusion or rage, and what she saw instead was something that went through her like a blade. He looked down at the child, and for 1/2 of 1 second, through the locked room of his expression, something moved. Not recognition. Something older than recognition. Something that went beneath the discipline and the years and whatever he had made himself into since the last time she had believed he was in the world. Then it sealed over. He stepped back. Not roughly, just cleanly, disengaging Noah's grip with a careful efficiency that suggested he was extremely uncomfortable with contact in general, and this in particular, and lifted his eyes to Serena. "Outside," he said. Not loud, not a public scene, just the one word, quiet and flat, carrying the absolute expectation of compliance. Serena's throat worked. She set the carafe on the nearest surface without looking at it. She pulled her apron strings once, unnecessarily, the way the hands move when the mind needs a moment to catch up. "Marcus," she said. Her voice was remarkably even. "Cover the floor." The teenager blinked at her, blinked at the man in the suit, said nothing, and nodded. She walked to the door. The rain hit her immediately. She stopped under the narrow metal awning above the entrance, her arms crossing against her chest. Not defensiveness, or not only defensiveness, also the cold. Also the fact that her uniform shirt was not rated for 40-degree rain, and she had walked out without thinking about any of that. Adrian came out behind her. He let the door close. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. The rain fell between them in a solid gray curtain beyond the awning's edge. A cab ran through a puddle at the curb and threw water against the parked cars. "He's not yours," Serena said. The words came out immediately, and she hated herself for them even as she said them, because they were absurd, and she knew they were absurd, and the fact that she'd said them anyway was evidence of how badly this particular morning had broken her open. Something shifted in his expression. "Not much. Enough. He called me—" "Kids do that." Her voice was still even. She was proud of that. "He doesn't have a father. He's 5. He sees a man in a suit walk in and he thinks it's funny. He does it to the mailman, too. He does it to strangers." Serena. Her name in his voice. She had not heard that in 7 years. She had not heard much of anything in his voice in 7 years because he had been dead. She had believed he was dead. She had built an entire life around the fact of his death. And hearing it now, quiet and certain the way he said everything, made something in her sternum ache like a fracture healing wrong. "Go back inside," he said. "Tell that child's mother to come speak to me." "I'm his mother." The words came out quieter than she meant them to. The silence after them was absolute. Adrian Vescari went very, very still. She watched him process it. She watched the locked room of his face cycle through something she couldn't fully read. Calculation, certainly, because his mind never stopped calculating, but underneath it, something raw that he was working to contain. He looked past her through the cafe window. She did not turn to look. She knew what he was seeing. Noah had climbed onto a bar stool at the counter and was trying to steal a muffin from the display case while Marcus pretended not to notice. "How old?" Adrian said. "I told you." "How old is the child, Serena?" His voice was flat and final, the way a door slamming is flat and final. Not raised. Never raised. With him. That had always been the thing that told you when you'd gone too far. Not the volume, but the specific texture of the quiet. She exhaled. 5. He looked at her. She looked back. Outside the awning, the rain kept falling. She had done the math, obviously. She had done the math 1,000 times over 5 years, and the math never changed, and she had made her peace with the math, or told herself she had, which was not the same thing. She watched Adrian do the math now, in real time, and she watched him arrive at the same place she always arrived, and she watched his jaw tighten once, and then deliberately release. "That's not possible," he said. But it was the wrong kind of statement. The kind someone makes when they know something is possible and are refusing to accept it rather than genuinely believing in the impossibility. "I thought you were dead," she said. Something moved across his face. "The explosion," she said. "In Dubrovnik, 3 years after you left." "The compound," the news said. "There were bodies, there was forensic evidence. Your organization put out confirmation through 3 different channels that you were—" She stopped, swallowed. "I was already 3 months along. I didn't know what else to do. I left. I took nothing with me. I left everything. I drove 17 hours to Seattle because I didn't know anyone here and no one would look for me here. And I needed him to be safe. I needed him to exist somewhere that didn't have anything to do with—" She stopped again. The word, his world, that world, the specific gravity of what Adrian Vescari was and had always been even before she had fully understood the shape of it, hung between them like something suspended. Adrian was watching her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not precisely. There were elements of things she recognized, the cold control, the calculation, but something underneath that she could not categorize. It looked distantly like a man realizing he is standing at the bottom of a drop he didn't know was there. "Someone told you I was dead," he said slowly. 3 sources. Someone arranged for 3 sources to confirm it. His voice had changed, very slightly, very precisely, the way a frequency shifts. "That's not how deaths get reported, Serena. That's how deaths get constructed." She stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer immediately. He was looking past her again, but not at Noah this time. At something else, or at nothing, at some internal architecture she wasn't permitted to see. "There's a birthmark," he said, "inside the left wrist. Small, crescent-shaped. It's genetic. It runs through my father's line. Brothers, sons, never daughters. My father had it. I have it. My grandfather before him." She knew about the birthmark. Noah had it. He'd had it from birth. A small dark crescent on the inside of his left wrist that she had noticed the first time the midwife cleaned him off and handed him to her, and which had made her cry in a way she'd told herself was just hormones and exhaustion and the normal, overwhelming flood of new parenthood, and which had actually been grief, specific, targeted grief for a man she'd believed was gone. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Adrian closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, something had settled into them. Not warmth, but something that had weight to it. Something with permanence. "He's mine," he said. Not a question. Her throat was tight. "He's mine." "He's mine too." The rain shifted angle. She was cold. Her wrist where the coffee had spilled was red and beginning to sting in a way she'd be aware of for hours. None of it seemed particularly relevant. "You're going to want to walk back in there," she said. "Collect whatever bodyguards you came with." "I came alone." She almost laughed. The idea of Adrian Vescari coming to a Tuesday morning coffee shop in Capitol Hill entirely alone struck her as so functionally improbable that she almost laughed, except nothing was funny. "You came alone." "I was in the neighborhood." He paused. "That sounds like a lie." "It does." "It isn't. I own a building 3 blocks north. I've been dealing with a contractor dispute for 2 weeks. I came in here because it was raining and the meeting ran long. He looked at her steadily. I was not looking for you. I didn't know you were in Seattle. No one knows I'm in Seattle. Someone does, he said. Someone has known for some time. Someone who also knew where to send forensic reports and intelligence confirmations and 3 separate channels of news about an explosion in Dubrovnik that killed me. He said it clinically, the way he spoke about everything that was actually dangerous. Someone has been moving us both like pieces for 7 years. I need you to understand that. The cold got worse. She pulled her arms tighter. Through the cafe window, Noah had gotten the muffin. He was eating it with the unself-conscious pleasure of a 5-year-old who has successfully committed minor theft and feels no remorse about it. He had Adrian's gray eyes and her dark hair and a laugh she could hear even through the glass, and he had no idea, absolutely no idea, that the man he'd wrapped his arms around 15 minutes ago had quietly shifted every equation of all their lives. What are you going to do? She asked. Her voice was not as steady as before. Adrian watched his son through the window. First, he said, I'm going to find out who told you I was dead. He said it the way he said everything, quietly, without emphasis, with the specific, flat certainty of a man who had never in his adult life said he was going to do something and then failed to do it. She believed him. She had always believed him. That had always been part of the problem. And then? She asked. He turned his head and looked at her. In the rain and the gray morning light, his eyes were the same impossible color they had always been, the same color that looked back at her every day across the breakfast table in the face of a child who had no idea where he came from. Then I'm going to make sure whoever arranged this never gets close enough to either of you to finish what they started, he said. She didn't ask him to explain what he meant by finish what they started. She understood him well enough to know that the phrasing was not accidental. She understood him well enough to know that he had already, in the 40 minutes since he'd walked through the cafe door, moved into a mode of assessment she had witnessed before. That particular cold clarity that preceded things she had always known were happening around the edges of their time together and had chosen not to examine too closely. You think someone wanted us separated, she said. I think someone made an enormous effort to ensure exactly that. He paused. And I think whoever it was is watching right now to see if it held. The statement landed with a specific weight. She looked at the street involuntarily, the parked cars, the pedestrians moving past with their umbrellas and their coffee cups, the windows of the buildings across the narrow road, the dark mouth of the parking garage 2 storefronts down. Nothing moved. Nothing was obviously wrong. Everything looked exactly like a Tuesday morning in a rainy city, which meant nothing. She knew it meant nothing. She had learned in the years she spent adjacent to Adrian Viscari's world that the most dangerous things wore the most ordinary faces. Noah goes to school at 10, she said. He's not going to school today. She looked at him sharply. I'm not your enemy, he said. The way he said it was not gentle, not reassuring in any conventional sense. He wasn't built for that, had never been built for that. It was simply a statement he was making the way he made all statements, as if the truth of something was the truth of it regardless of whether it was convenient. I'm the last person in the world who wants harm to come to that child. You understand that? She did. She hated that she did, but she did. One day, she said, you stay out of his sight and out of his life for one day while I figure out. Serena. Quiet. Final. There's a man sitting in the black sedan across the street who was not there when I came in. He's been looking at this cafe for 11 minutes. She did not turn her head. He has a direct line of sight to the counter, Adrian said, where your son is sitting. Her hands, folded across her chest against the cold, pressed harder against her ribs. You have 30 seconds to tell me if there's a back exit, he said. She told him. Her voice did not shake. She wanted to believe that was strength. She suspected it was only that she had run out of room inside herself to be afraid in any way that produced sound, and what was left was the harder, quieter thing. The thing that had kept her functioning for 5 years as a single parent with no safety net in a city where no one knew her name. The thing that got Noah to school every morning and kept the cafe job and paid the rent and did not permit collapse, because collapse was not an option when someone small was counting on you. She walked back through the front door. She walked to the counter, keeping her face easy and her body language ordinary, and she crouched down beside her son, and she said in his ear, "Hey, baby, we're going on an adventure. Bring the muffin." Noah looked at her. He had her instincts even if he didn't know it yet. Some quick animal read of her face that made him not ask questions, just slide off the stool. "Can I bring 2 muffins?" he asked. "Sure," she said. He took 2. They went out through the kitchen, past Darnell, who said, "Hey," and then didn't finish the sentence because one look at her face apparently told him everything, and through the back door into the alley. Adrian was already there. He'd come around the building in the time it took them to cross the cafe floor. He stood in the alley rain, charcoal suit already soaked through the shoulders, and he looked at Noah with the expression of a man encountering something he had no training for and no defenses against. An expression Serena had never once seen on his face and suspected no one had ever seen there. An expression that lasted perhaps 3 seconds before his face went to its default careful blank. Noah looked up at him. "You're the man from inside," Noah said. "Yes," Adrian said. "You didn't say anything when I called you Daddy." "I know." "That's okay," Noah said, with the philosophical generosity of a 5-year-old for whom the world is still mostly comprehensible. "My friend Carlos has 2 dads, and neither of them answer right away either." Something moved across Adrian's face, not the locked room, something that hadn't been there before and hadn't been named yet. "We need to move," he said to Serena over Noah's head. "I know," she said. "There's a vehicle 2 blocks east. My driver." "I thought you came alone." "I came into the cafe alone." She almost said something else. Instead, she reached down and took Noah's hand, the small, warm weight of it in her cold palm, and she looked at Adrian Vescari, the man she had mourned, the man she had rebuilt herself in the absence of, the man whose son was eating a stolen muffin in an alley in the rain. And she made the specific kind of decision that isn't really a decision because there is only one direction available to you when all the other doors have sealed. She followed him. 3 blocks away, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out. Unknown number. She didn't answer it. She looked at the screen for the 3 seconds it rang and then it stopped. A text arrived. 4 words. "You should have run." Her hand tightened around the phone. She looked up at the back of Adrian's head, at the rain soaking through his suit, at the straightness of his shoulders that never changed regardless of what was happening. And she thought about the black sedan across the street and the man looking at the cafe window. And she thought about 7 years of believing she was safe because she was hidden. And she thought about how completely and finally that particular belief had just been dissolved. She put the phone back in her pocket. She didn't tell Adrian about the text. Not yet. Because in the space of the last 40 minutes, she had relearned something she had spent 7 years trying to forget. That knowing Adrian Vescari meant being permanently adjacent to things that wanted to kill the people close to him, and that this was not going to change simply because she had believed he was dead and built something small and careful and hers in his absence, and that Noah, 5 years old, muffin in each hand, asking Adrian how tall the buildings were, had inherited not just his father's eyes, but his father's enemies. And she didn't yet know if the man walking beside her was the only thing standing between her son and those enemies, or whether he was the reason those enemies had found them in the first place. The sedan pulled up, dark glass. Serena couldn't see the driver's face. Adrian opened the rear door. "Get in," he said. She looked at him. "Serena." She got in. The door closed behind her. Noah climbed into the middle seat and immediately began asking questions about the car's interior lighting in the specific exhausting way of 5-year-olds who have never met a detail they didn't want explained. Serena watched the alley they'd come from through the tinted rear window. Nothing followed them out of it. Nothing she could see. Adrian got in the front passenger seat. He said one word to the driver and the car moved. Serena watched Seattle slide past the dark glass. She thought about the text. "You should have run." She thought about the man in the sedan with the direct line of sight to her son. She thought about Adrian's voice saying someone arranged for 3 sources to confirm it. She thought about Lucien Moretti's name, which she had heard once, 7 years ago, from Adrian himself in an unguarded moment, described as the most loyal man in his organization. She thought about loyalty and what it cost and what it meant when someone decided it wasn't enough. And she thought about the fact that whoever had sent that text, whoever was watching, Whoever had arranged the false death and the intercepted letters and the years of careful separation was doing it right now, was watching the sedan pull away from the curb, was already deciding what to do next. They had found her. After 7 years of silence and careful invisibility, they had found her. And the only reason she could think of, the only logical, functional reason for why they had waited, why they had known and waited and done nothing until today, was that they had been waiting for exactly this. For Adrian to walk through the cafe door. For Adrian to see his son. For the two of them to be in the same place at the same time so that whatever came next could erase them both in one move. The sedan accelerated onto the expressway. Noah fell asleep against her arm 11 minutes later, the second muffin half-eaten in his lap, completely unbothered by the fact that his entire world had just changed. Serena sat with her cold hands in her lap and her son asleep against her shoulder and watched Adrian make a phone call in the front seat, his voice too low to hear, and she understood with a clarity that felt like the rain, cold and total and coming from everywhere at once, that the careful, ordinary life she had built in this city was already gone. The only question now was whether what replaced it would keep her son alive. She looked at her phone. You should have run. She hadn't. She wasn't sure yet if that was courage or the worst mistake she'd ever made. The sedan smelled like leather and something chemical underneath it, cleaning solvent or gun oil or both. And Serena sat with Noah's weight warm against her left side and watched the back of Adrian's head and said nothing for 11 miles. He was on the phone the entire time. Not the same call. 3 separate calls, each one brief, each one in a different language. English first, then something that sounded like Italian but moved faster and with harder consonants, then a third she didn't recognize at all. He never raised his voice. He never indicated urgency through volume, which was the thing she had always found most unsettling about him. That the pitch of his voice bore no relationship to the severity of what he was discussing. He could be ordering lunch or arranging the elimination of a problem and the register was identical. She'd told herself once that she found it reassuring. She'd been 23 and very stupid about certain things. The driver took them off the expressway at an exit she didn't know and through a series of turns that felt deliberate. Not the route to any specific destination, but the route of someone checking for a tail, doubling back, moving in patterns. She recognized it vaguely from a different life, from a different version of herself who had asked fewer questions than she should have. Noah slept through all of it. He was a good sleeper. He'd always been a good sleeper, which she had counted among her private blessings since the first year when she'd been doing everything alone and sleep had been the only resource she couldn't manufacture on her own. He slept with his mouth slightly open and one hand loose in his lap and the half-eaten muffin tilting dangerously, and Serena caught it before it fell without taking her eyes off the road ahead. Adrian ended the third call. The car was quiet for the first time since they'd pulled away from the alley. "Where are you taking us?" Serena said. "Safe house, 20 minutes? Your safe house." "Yes." That's not reassuring. He turned his head slightly, not quite looking at her. It's more reassuring than the alternative. Which is? Staying anywhere you've been before. He paused. They know your cafe. They know your routine. If they've been watching for any significant period, they know your apartment. The apartment. She thought about her apartment. The specific combination of small and carefully arranged that she'd made feel like home over 4 years. Noah's drawings on the refrigerator. The crack in the kitchen tile she kept meaning to report to the landlord. The fire escape outside his bedroom window that she'd never once thought of as a liability until right now. "How long?" she said. "How long do you think they've been watching?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. Long enough to know that today would be the day. That doesn't answer the question. No, he said. It doesn't. She let that sit. She knew what it meant when he declined to answer a question directly. It meant the actual answer was worse than a non-answer, and he'd made a calculation about what she could absorb in a moving vehicle with a sleeping child. She hated that she still knew how to read him. She hated more that he was probably right. The safe house turned out to be a floor of a building in an industrial area south of downtown, not a residential neighborhood, not anywhere she'd been before. A converted warehouse that had been renovated into offices or storage or both. 4 stories of raw concrete and small high windows. The driver pulled into an underground garage and they sat with the engine off for 30 seconds while Adrian watched the mirrors. Then he got out. Serena lifted Noah without waking him. He was heavy, heavier than he looked, dense the way small children sometimes are, all that concentrated life. And she shifted him against her shoulder and followed Adrian through a steel door and up 2 flights of stairs. The room was large and aggressively plain, concrete floors, high ceilings, several folding tables, a bank of monitors along one wall that were currently dark, a kitchen area along another wall, functional and stripped down, no decoration, 2 closed doors that she assumed led to sleeping areas. A man was already there. He was sitting at one of the folding tables with a laptop and a coffee, and he stood when they came in with the easy, unhurried movement of someone who had been expecting them. He was in his 50s, silver-haired, with the particular build of a man who'd been physically formidable once and had maintained enough of it to remain relevant. He wore a dark sweater and no jacket. His eyes went to Serena and Noah and processed them with a speed that told her he was good at processing unexpected information. He looked at Adrian. "Lucien," Adrian said. Something cold moved through Serena's chest. Not recognition. She'd never met this man. Something more instinctive. The particular alertness that fires when a room changes and you don't know why yet. "The cafe had coverage," Adrian said, moving past pleasantries entirely. "Black sedan, direct line of sight to the interior. Someone knew she'd be there." Lucien Moretti nodded slowly. His face expressed appropriate concern. "How long has she been in Seattle?" 4 years, apparently. "And you had no idea?" "None." Adrian set his jacket on the back of a chair. His shirt underneath was soaked through the shoulders from the rain. He didn't seem to notice. "Which means either our surveillance on the Pacific Northwest was inadequate, or someone was actively blocking the information. Or she was simply very careful," Lucien said. He looked at Serena with something she might have read as sympathy. "You were very careful." "I was," she said. Her voice came out flat. She set Noah down on a couch that was against the far wall, utilitarian gray, military surplus or close to it, and arranged him on his side with his backpack as a bolster because she had no blanket and he was still asleep, and she wanted him to stay that way for as long as possible. She wanted him to stay that way until she understood what she'd walked into. She straightened up and looked at Lucien Moretti. He was watching her with an expression of patient interest. "You're the consigliere," she said. "I've held that role, yes." "Among others." He smiled. It reached his eyes perfectly. "Serena, I've heard of you, of course, though I understand you go by Vale now rather than—" "I've always gone by Vale," she said. "That was my name before?" "Of course." The smile adjusted without losing any warmth. "You must have questions." "About 100. Ask what's most important." She looked at Adrian, who was standing with his back to the monitors and his arms at his sides, watching the exchange. His face gave her nothing. "When he disappeared," she said. She wasn't looking at Lucien anymore. She was looking at Adrian. "7 years ago, when you left—" She stopped. Started again. "You left. You were there, and then you weren't. No explanation. I assumed the relationship was—" "It was not my choice," Adrian said. 3 months. That was how long they'd had. Not a relationship in any official sense, nothing named or declared, but something that had weight to it, something that had felt like it was becoming something. And then one morning he was simply not where he was supposed to be, and no one she could safely ask knew anything, and she'd spent 3 weeks telling herself it was the nature of the world he inhabited, the nature of men like him, the nature of her own poor judgment. And then the pregnancy test. And then, 8 weeks after that, the news about the explosion. "Someone pulled you," she said. "Someone made you leave. Someone informed me that remaining in contact with you was creating an unacceptable security risk." He said it without the emotion she might have expected. Not bitterly, not with grief, just the statement of a fact he had processed and filed. That you had been identified by a rival organization. That continuing the relationship would put you in direct danger. And you believed that. I had reason to. There had been 2 attempts on associated civilians in the preceding 6 months. He paused. I was told you'd been relocated, moved somewhere safe, that you were being monitored for your own protection. Something shifted in Serena's understanding. "Monitored by whom?" she said. A silence. She looked at Lucien. Lucien's expression was one of careful, measured gravity. "I managed those operations at that time," he said. The civilian protection protocols. You told him I'd been relocated. You had been a concern, yes. Did you tell him I'd been relocated? She said. Flat, direct, the way she'd learned to ask questions when she actually wanted answers rather than management. Lucien looked at her with the eyes of a man who was very good at seeming transparent. There were operational decisions made during that period that… Lucien, Adrian's voice, quiet as always, but with a texture change she felt in her back teeth. The older man stopped. She asked you a direct question, Adrian said. Something moved through Lucien's face, too fast to name. He set it back in order with the skill of long practice. Yes. I conveyed information about your relocation. It was necessary to allow you time to establish distance. What information? Adrian said. That you'd gone to stay with family in Portland. I don't have family in Portland, Serena said. I was not aware of that at the time. And the explosion, Adrian said. Very quiet now. In Dubrovnik, the compound. A genuine incident, Lucien said smoothly. We used the opportunity. What? You used it, Adrian said. We used it to consolidate. Who is we? The room went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of nothing happening, but the quiet of something that has been building, finally arriving at the surface. Lucien Moretti looked at Adrian Vescari with the patience of a man who has been waiting for a question for a very long time and has had the answer ready almost as long. There were people within the organization, he said, who believed that certain attachments were making leadership vulnerable, emotional decisions, relational complications. The Dubrovnik narrative was a tool. I want to be clear that no one was harmed. You faked my death, Adrian said. A controlled narrative. You told the woman carrying my child that I was dead. The word hung in the concrete room. Serena heard it land on Lucien Moretti with a specific weight and watched the older man recalibrate in real time. Watched him understand that Adrian had already known before he asked, had known since the alley outside the cafe, and had been running the conversation toward this point deliberately. I was not aware of the pregnancy, Lucien said. No? Adrian, you know me. You know… Tell me who was in the sedan this morning, Adrian said. Lucien's face did something then. Not much. A micro-expression she might have missed if she hadn't been watching for it. A fractional tightening around the eyes that lasted less than half a second. I don't know what sedan you're referring to. Black, registered plates, parked on Blanchard Street at 8:52 this morning, with a direct view of the Anchor Cafe. I've had no operations running in Seattle. I know you haven't, Adrian said. That's not what I asked. The distinction was precise. Serena understood it 3 seconds after Adrian made it. He wasn't asking if Lucien had run the operation. He was asking if Lucien knew who had. Lucien was quiet. How long have you known she was here? Adrian said. Adrian, how long? Lucien set his coffee mug on the table. He did it carefully, with the deliberateness of someone choosing how to occupy his hands. 18 months, he said. The number was a physical thing in the room. Serena felt it the way she felt the cold, not as information, but as something that passed through her and left a mark. 18 months. Noah had been 3.5 years old 18 months ago. She'd been working the breakfast shift at the Anchor for 2 months. She had believed herself invisible. Adrian's jaw moved once. Set. You knew, he said. I had information, yes. You knew where she was. You knew about the child. I was gathering information for 18 months. Context matters. The sedan this morning, Adrian said. Was that gathering information? Lucien was quiet for too long. Lucien. There are elements of the current situation that are more complicated than I can explain, and Adrian moved. He moved the way she'd seen him move once before, years ago, in a context she'd tried very hard to mentally file under things she hadn't witnessed. Fast and without preliminary, without the tells that most people show when they're deciding to close the distance between themselves and someone else. He was across the room and had Lucien's jacket front in his fist before the older man had completed his next breath. He didn't hit him. He didn't need to. He held him with the specific controlled force of a man who was deciding whether to, and had not yet decided. The child, Adrian said. 6 inches from Lucian's face. Adrian, the child was in that cafe. The man in that sedan had a direct line on my son. His voice was still quiet. That was the worst part of it. Tell me why. Lucian's face, for the first time since Serena had laid eyes on him, showed something that was not fully managed. Something older and harder moved behind his eyes. Not fear precisely, but the acknowledgement of someone who has been very good at a dangerous game for a very long time and has just been shown a wall they weren't expecting. There are people, Lucian said, who believe the Vescari bloodline should end with you. The sentence finished itself in the concrete silence of the room. Serena looked at Noah asleep on the gray couch. His left wrist was turned out slightly, and even from across the room she could see the small dark crescent on the inside of it, the birthmark she had cried over and never fully explained to herself or anyone else. Adrian released Lucian. He stepped back once. He straightened his shirt cuff with the particular displaced precision of a man who is deciding not to do something more serious and needs a moment to make that decision final. Get out, he said. Adrian, listen to me. You have 30 seconds. If you remove me from this operation, you lose the only person who knows the full scope of what's been. You had a man watching my son. The quiet was absolute. 25 seconds. Lucien picked up his laptop and his coffee with the dignity of a man who has prepared for the possibility of this moment and is executing the exit he planned. He moved toward the door. He paused with his hand on it. The people behind the sedan, he said, without turning around. They're not going to stop because you threw me out of the room. You need me to. 19 seconds, Adrian said. Lucian left. The door closed. The room was quiet except for Noah's breathing and the distant sound of traffic from somewhere above and outside the concrete. Serena realized she had been holding herself very still, the way she held herself in the early years with Noah when she was trying not to wake him. A deep physical restraint that she was only aware of now that it released. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. Her lungs took in more air than they had in the last 7 minutes. Adrian stood with his back to her, facing the door. She waited. He knew for 18 months, she said. Yes. And he didn't tell you? No. Why not? He turned around. His face was closed and functional, and behind it something was moving that he was not permitting to the surface. Because I would have come for you, he said. For both of you. She absorbed that. And that's bad, she said. For him, specifically. For what he's been building, yes. He moved to the monitors and touched a keypad, and the screens came alive. 4 of them, each showing a different camera angle from outside the building. The garage, the street, the alley entrance, a rooftop view. He spent years telling me the right operational decisions while making different ones for himself. If I'd known about the child, I would have shifted my priorities significantly. Away from the organization. Yes. He wanted you focused on the organization. He needed me focused on it, Adrian said, so he could continue using it. She sat down. Not on the couch with Noah, in a chair at one of the folding tables, because her legs had decided they'd done enough. She set her hands on the table surface and looked at them. There was still a faint pink line on her right wrist from the coffee spill. The muffins were somewhere in the back seat of the sedan. She thought, absurdly, about whether she'd locked the cafe when she left. The people behind the sedan, she said. What he said. The Vescari bloodline. It's a power structure issue, Adrian said. He was still watching the monitors. The organization runs on lineage claims in certain territories, old money, old arrangements. My father built it that way. Intentionally, I think, to prevent exactly the kind of internal takeover that... He stopped. Something crossed his face. That someone might have been planning for a long time. She watched him arrive at something. Watched the specific sequence of a man whose mind worked through implications with mechanical clarity, reaching a conclusion he didn't want. How long have you trusted Lucian? She said. 22 years. And in 22 years... He was never wrong, Adrian said, flat, clinical. Every intelligence assessment, every risk evaluation, every recommendation. He was never wrong. People who are never wrong, she said, are either very good or very careful about which information they give you. Adrian looked at her. She looked back. Something moved between them that wasn't warmth and wasn't the ghost of what they'd been to each other 7 years ago, but was something else. The specific recognition of two people who understand each other's intelligence and are currently on the same side of a problem. He said there are people, she said. Multiple. Not just him. Yes. So removing him from the room didn't... No, Adrian said. It didn't. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. The same unknown number as before. This time it was a photo. She looked at the photo for a long moment before she showed it to Adrian. When she did, he crossed the room in 4 steps and took the phone and looked at it with the stillness of someone who has trained themselves not to react to things that require immediate reaction. The photo was of the Anchor Cafe. It had been taken from inside, through the window, at the counter where Noah had been sitting 30 minutes ago. The timestamp in the corner read 9:14 a.m. Current time, 9:09 a.m. She said, "That's 5 minutes from now," Adrian said. "That's not possible. Someone sent you an image from 5 minutes in the future. That's not..." "Someone said a delayed send," he said, with the controlled speed of a man correcting a misunderstanding under time pressure. "They were in the cafe. They took the photo while you were still there, cued it to deliver at 9:14, and walked out. The message is that they were close enough to touch him. The close enough to touch him landed somewhere in her chest that had no defense for it." Adrian was already on his phone again. She looked at Noah. He'd shifted in his sleep, turned onto his back with one arm thrown up over his head, the posture of a child who has never once in his life felt unsafe enough to sleep defensively. That particular innocence, that complete and absolute trust that the world would hold still while he wasn't paying attention, felt like the most fragile thing she'd ever been responsible for protecting. She stood up. Her voice, when she spoke, was level with the specific effort of someone who has decided to be level as an act of will, rather than because they are. "What do we do now?" Adrian lowered his phone. He looked at her. "We find out how deep this goes," he said, "and we do it tonight, before they move again. And Noah, he stays here. I'll have 2 men on this floor by..." "He stays where I can see him," she said. Hard, non-negotiable. The first truly non-negotiable thing she'd said since this morning, and something in her voice made it clear that this particular negotiation wasn't opening. Adrian looked at her. The locked room of his face did something that might, under other circumstances, have looked like respect. "Then you stay in the room," he said. "Both of you. You don't open the door unless I give you a code word." "What's the code word?" He thought about it for 1 second. "Coffee," he said. Something almost like a laugh moved through her, dark and involuntary, and gone almost before it arrived. She nodded. He was halfway to the door when she said, "Adrian." He stopped. "Lucienne," the way he left. She paused, choosing the words. He wasn't scared. Adrian turned his head. "You told him to leave, and he left," she said. "But he wasn't scared. He was calculated. Like a man who has somewhere else to be, and you just gave him permission to go there." The silence that followed had a texture to it. Adrian stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and processed what she'd said with the same cold clarity he brought to everything. And she watched him arrive at the same place she'd arrived, and she watched his face do the thing it did when the problem was worse than the previous estimate. He reached for his phone. She heard him call someone, one word, a name she didn't catch, and say, "Find Lucien, now. Don't let him make a call." He looked at her one more time before he went through the door. She looked back. The door closed. She moved to the couch and sat next to Noah and put her hand on his back, feeling him breathe, slow and even, and entirely unaware. And she looked at the 4 monitors across the room, showing the empty street, the empty alley, the empty garage. On the monitor showing the rooftop view, something moved. She leaned forward. A figure. On the roof of the building across the street. Standing still, looking down. Then stepping back out of the frame. She grabbed her phone. She dialed Adrian's number. It rang 4 times, went to voicemail. 2. She stood up, heart slamming against her ribs with a force she felt in her throat, and crossed the room to the door and put her hand on it. And that was when she heard it. From somewhere below, from the direction of the garage, a sound she had hoped never to hear in a building where her child was sleeping. 2 gunshots. Then nothing. 2 shots. Then the specific silence that follows gunfire indoors. Not quiet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of a ringing absence, the air still vibrating with what it had just been asked to absorb. Serena's hand was on the door. She did not open it. Every instinct in her body was pulling in 2 directions simultaneously with equal force. Noah behind her on the couch, the sound below her through the floor, and the absolute impossibility of choosing between them with any confidence that the choice was right. She stood with her palm flat against the cold steel of the door and her forehead almost touching it, and she breathed. Once. Twice. Noah was still asleep. She could hear him. The soft, irregular rhythm of a child's sleep breathing, the small, unconscious sounds he made when he shifted. He hadn't woken. The concrete had absorbed the sound, or the distance had been enough, or he was simply the kind of sleeper who required more than 2 gunshots to pull him back from whatever 5-year-olds dreamed about. She took her hand off the door. She crossed to the monitors. The garage camera, bottom left screen, showed nothing. An empty concrete floor. The sedan still parked where the driver had left it. No movement, no bodies visible. Whatever had happened was off-frame, or the camera had been positioned badly, or both. The street camera showed 2 men she didn't recognize moving quickly along the sidewalk away from the building's exterior entrance. They were not running. Running drew attention. They were moving with the controlled speed of professionals who understood the difference between urgency and visibility. She watched them until they went off frame. Her phone was in her hand. She tried Adrian again. 4 rings. Voicemail. She tried a 3rd time immediately. 2 rings this time, then a disconnection, which was different from voicemail, which meant the call was being ended by the phone rather than going unanswered. Someone was rejecting her calls. She stood very still for 3 seconds and processed what that meant. Then she went to Noah and crouched down in front of him and put her hand on his shoulder. "Hey," she said quietly. "Baby, wake up." He surfaced with the boneless resistance of a small child being pulled from deep sleep. "I need you awake, just for a little bit." He opened his eyes. He looked at her face with the unfiltered accuracy of a child who has spent 5 years learning to read his mother's expressions as a primary source of information about the state of the world. She watched him read her now. He sat up. "Is it bad?" he asked. "We're okay," she said. "I need you to stay right here and not make any noise. Can you do that?" "Where are you going?" "Nowhere." She meant it. She was not opening that door. She was not moving from this floor until she had more information than she currently had, because the last time she had acted on partial information, she had spent 7 years believing a dead man's timeline. "Okay," Noah said. He said it with the solemn practicality of a child who has been raised by a woman who does not panic, and has therefore learned to calibrate his own responses to hers. He picked up the remaining muffin from his lap and ate a piece of it and watched the monitors with her. She almost told him not to look. She didn't. He was already looking. And the monitors showed nothing now except the empty street and the empty alley and the garage with the sedan and no bodies. No bodies was either good or bad, and she couldn't determine which. The door opened. She spun. Adrian came through it with blood on his left sleeve. Not his own, or she thought not his own, because he was moving with no physical impairment, no favoring, no asymmetry that suggested injury. He closed the door behind him and his eyes went immediately to Noah, and something in his face shifted in the specific involuntary way she was beginning to recognize. That fraction of unwilled human response that preceded the controlled mask resettling. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's not mine." "The shots? My driver." He moved to the monitors and looked at them briefly and then looked away, a rapid assessment, check, and catalog. "He's alive." The rounds hit the vehicle. He dropped on instinct. The sound from the floor made me think. He stopped. "It doesn't matter. He's alive. I have people with him." "The 2 men on the street." He looked at her sharply. "You saw them." "Camera." She pointed at the screen. He looked at the street camera for a moment. His jaw was set. "They were in position before we arrived. Someone told them where we were going." She waited. He turned to look at her and said it before she had to ask. "Lucien was the only person I told." "You called someone from the car." "Through an encrypted line that runs through Lucien's own system. He said it with the flat precision of a man driving a nail. He heard every word I said in the car. The scope of it settled over her like the rain that morning, total and coming from everywhere at once. He set up the safe house, she said. He suggested it, months ago, in a different context, as a contingency. Adrian's voice had the quality of a man reconstructing something with the unpleasant knowledge of what the reconstruction will reveal. I used it today because it was the fastest option, because I trusted the suggestion. He wanted us here. He needed us somewhere he had pre-positioned assets. Adrian reached into his jacket and placed a handgun on the table with the careful deliberateness of someone making a decision concrete. We can't stay. Where do we go? I have a property, not through Lucien, not through the organization's network, a private purchase, 7 years ago, under a name no one has connected to me. He paused. I bought it the year I was told you'd been relocated to Portland. I don't know why I bought it. She looked at him. That's not... She stopped. She was going to say that's not relevant, but she wasn't sure it wasn't. The specific irrationality of a controlled man making a private purchase under a false name, the same year he'd been told the woman he hadn't named his feelings for had disappeared. That was the kind of thing she didn't have the equipment to process right now, so she set it in a queue and moved forward. How do we get there without Lucien knowing? She said. We don't use anything he has access to. He moved toward this kitchen area and opened a lower cabinet and removed a bag she hadn't seen him put there. Prepositioned, she realized, or left by someone before they'd arrived. Inside the bag, cash, 2 phones still in packaging, a set of keys. New phones, new route, vehicle I source in the next 10 minutes. You keep cash in your safe houses. I keep resources in locations I control. Lucien controlled this one. Yes, he said. Lesson learned. She stood up. Noah, come here. He came, muffin still in hand, and she took his hand and looked at Adrian. 10 minutes. 5, he said. She didn't argue. They were on the street in 4. The new vehicle was a gray pickup truck that appeared in the alley behind the building with a driver Adrian had called from one of the new phones, a man she'd never seen, young, who handed over the keys without speaking and walked away and disappeared around a corner. Adrian drove. She sat in the back with Noah, who had discovered that the truck had heated seats and was deeply interested in the controls. They drove north. 45 minutes of surface streets, no freeway, Adrian running the mirrors in the particular way she'd observed before. She watched him, and she watched the road behind them, and she thought about Lucien Moretti's exit. The calculated absence of fear, the way he'd moved toward the door, a man going where he intended to go. She thought about 18 months. She thought about the photo with the future timestamp. She thought about all the ways you could surveil a person and the person never knows, never feels the weight of being observed, moves through their days believing themselves private and contained. She thought about whether there were other things she didn't know. The property was 40 minutes north of the city, off a county road that became gravel, and then became dirt, and then became a long driveway through Douglas firs that filtered the gray afternoon light into something almost silver. The house at the end of it was modest. 2 stories, cedar siding, a covered porch, the kind of house that belonged to a person who wanted to be somewhere that wasn't a city without being too far from the idea of one. It was also entirely unexpected from the road. You couldn't see it until the last turn. She filed that away. Inside, cold from being unused, but structurally sound. Furniture under dust covers. A wood stove in the main room. A kitchen with dry goods in the cabinets. Shelf stable, deliberately stocked. A table. Chairs. A narrow staircase leading up. Noah went immediately to the wood stove and studied it. Is this how you make fire? He asked. Yes, Adrian said. Can we make fire? Later. That means no, Noah told Serena in a stage whisper. It means later, Adrian said, and something in his voice was not quite the controlled clinical flatness from the city. There was an edge in it that was sharper and less deliberate, as if the management of small, ordinary conversation was requiring more bandwidth than he had available, and some of it was leaking through. It was, she realized, the most human thing she'd heard from him all day. She sent Noah upstairs to pick a room while she unpacked the bag's contents on the kitchen table. Cash in 3 denominations, 2 phones activated, a folded document she didn't open yet, a utility knife. Adrienne stood at the front window looking at the driveway. "Tell me about Lucien," she said. He didn't turn. "What specifically?" "Everything I don't know." "Which is most of it." A pause. "He came into my father's organization 25 years ago as an attorney, financial restructuring. He was good at making complicated money movements look unremarkable. My father trusted him with operational details within 6 months." He paused. "My father was not a trusting man." "And when your father died?" "Lucien was the one who told me." He said it without effect. "He drove me to identify the body. He handled all the arrangements afterward. He told me the circumstances. He told me who was responsible." She looked at his back. "Was he?" The pause that followed was not a long pause. It was a precise one. "I acted on what he told me," Adrienne said. "I made decisions based on his information. The war that followed, 18 months of it, 4 organizational territories, a body count that I—" He stopped, set it down. "I acted on his information." She understood what he wasn't saying. She let it stay unsaid. "Your father's death," she said. "If Lucien, I know. If he orchestrated it, then everything after was, I know, Serena." The edge again. Harder this time. She stopped pushing that particular line and moved to another. "The people he mentioned," she said, "who believe the bloodline should end with you. Who are they?" He turned from the window. He looked at her with the expression of a man deciding how much of a map to hand someone who will have to navigate, regardless of whether they have it. "The financial structure of the organization depends on inheritance protocols," he said. "Territories, alliances, debt arrangements, they all carry forward through family claim. Without a direct heir, everything would need to be renegotiated upon my death. Renegotiated or simply taken. And with a direct heir, everything continues automatically, without negotiation." She thought about Noah upstairs, choosing a room, probably opening every door and inspecting every closet with the investigative thoroughness of a child in an unfamiliar space. "Lucien wants the territories," she said. "Lucien wants what he's spent 20 years helping build," Adrienne said. "He doesn't want to inherit it. He wants to control it, which requires removing the legitimate claim. You and Noah. In that order." The directness of it, the particular clinical flatness with which he said it, landed in her chest with a weight she'd been bracing for and still wasn't ready for. Her son. A target. Not as collateral damage, not incidentally, but specifically and deliberately. The crescent birthmark on his left wrist read as a death warrant in a world she'd spent 5 years trying to believe she and Noah had escaped. She sat down at the kitchen table. She put her hands flat on the wood surface and looked at them. The pink line from the coffee spill had faded. Her hands looked like the hands of a person who had spent years carrying things, plates, a child, the specific, unglamorous weight of a life rebuilt from zero. They did not look like the hands of someone equipped for what the next 48 hours apparently required. She picked up the folded document from the table. She opened it. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at, then another moment to understand the implications. Then she looked up at Adrienne and said, very quietly, "Where did you get this?" He crossed the room and looked at what she was holding. "I've never seen that before," he said. She turned it toward him. It was a property document. Specifically, it was a deed for a building in the Belltown district of Seattle, registered 7 years ago, under a name she didn't recognize, but the address she recognized. It was the address of the building where she'd lived when she'd first arrived in Seattle, the apartment she'd rented with cash and a false reference and the specific desperation of a pregnant woman with 17 hours of driving behind her and nowhere she was certain was safe. The apartment she'd lived in for 3 months before she'd found the Anchor and the Capitol Hill room above a dry cleaner that was better. Someone had owned that building. Someone had bought that building, as a property investment, or as a surveillance position, or as both, 7 years ago. The name on the deed was not Lucien Moretti. It was a name she recognized from a different direction entirely, from a conversation that had not happened in this context, from a reference made once, casually, in the way that people mention details they consider too minor to require discretion. She looked at Adrian. "Marcus Webb," she said. "Do you know that name?" Something moved through his face. "Where did you see that name?" "It's on the deed." "That's not possible." "It's on the deed." He took the document from her hands and looked at it. She watched him read the name and watched something change in the quality of his stillness. Not more controlled, but differently controlled, as if the thing he was containing had shifted shape. "Marcus Webb is dead," he said. "When?" 4 years ago. He was a financial intermediary, worked with 3 separate organizations including ours. He died in a car accident in Vancouver. Organized. Ruled accidental. "Organized," she said again, harder. Adrian set the document on the table. He looked at it. "Webb was Lucien's external contact for the money movements that my father originally hired Lucien to manage. If Webb's name is on a property registered at your first Seattle address..." "Lucien wasn't working alone from the beginning," she said. "Webb knew where I was from the moment I arrived, which means Lucien knew, which means the 18 months he admitted to was a lie. He's known since you got here. He's known since before I got here." She paused, the logic assembling itself in real time with the specific cold clarity of someone who has run out of the luxury of processing things slowly. The Dubrovnik story. The 3 channels of confirmation. He needed me somewhere specific, somewhere he had visibility. He didn't just fake your death and let me run. He ran me. He put me where he wanted me. The silence had a different quality than before. Adrian looked at her with the expression of a man who has built his entire operational life on a foundation he's just discovered was poured by someone else. "He chose Seattle," Adrian said. "He chose Seattle," she said. "He chose the building. He chose the timing. All of it." "Why Seattle?" "Because you have the building 3 blocks from the anchor," she said. "The one you've been dealing with a contractor dispute over for 2 weeks. He knew you'd end up there eventually. He knew proximity would create contact. He engineered this morning." The words arranged themselves in the air between them, like something structural, like the frame of something very large they were only now seeing the full dimensions of. Someone had spent 7 years building toward a Tuesday morning in a rain-soaked cafe. The sound from upstairs was Noah's footsteps, running across the floor above them, the particular rhythmic thudding of a child who has decided the space overhead is a running space and is testing its parameters. Adrian looked at the ceiling. Serena looked at Adrian. "He wanted us together," she said, "in the same place at the same time so he could end it." "Or," Adrian said, and the quality of his voice had changed to something she hadn't heard before, something colder and more careful than the operational control, something underneath it. "Or he wanted me to find you first, to know about Noah, to make me want to protect something." She didn't understand immediately. Then she did. "A man who wants to protect his son," she said slowly, "makes different decisions than a man who has nothing." "A man protecting his son can be leveraged," Adrian said, "can be moved, can be brought to specific locations at specific times under the guise of keeping them safe." He paused. "A man protecting his son walks into traps that a man with nothing to lose would never enter." The wood stove was cold. The house smelled of cedar and disuse. Outside, the firs moved in a light wind that had picked up since they'd left the city. "He's going to take Noah," she said. "He's going to try to take Noah," Adrian said, "and use him to move me. And then he doesn't need either of us anymore." She stood up from the table. She moved to the window and looked out at the driveway. The gravel, the trees, the silver light coming through in columns. Everything was still. Everything looked like nothing was wrong. She had learned today what that meant. Her phone, the new one, still in its packaging until Adrian had activated it in the truck, buzzed on the table. She looked at it without touching it. Unknown number. She picked it up. She answered it. The voice on the other end was not Lucien Moretti's. It was a woman's voice, precise and level, and carrying the specific cadence of someone who has rehearsed a script but is good enough that the rehearsal doesn't show. Mrs. Vale, the woman said, we have a situation you should understand before Adrian makes his next move. Serena said nothing. My name is Dara Voss, the woman said. I worked with Marcus Webb for 6 years. I know where every property document, every financial record, and every communication log from the last 10 years of Lucien Moretti's external operations is stored. A pause. I also know that Lucien did not engineer this alone, and the person who authorized the original plan, the fake death, the relocation, all of it, was not Lucien. Serena's hand tightened on the phone. Then who? She said. The pause before the answer was exactly long enough to be deliberate. His father, Dara Voss said. The cold in the room moved through Serena from the outside in. Adrian's father, she said. Flat, testing the shape of it. Silvio Vescari gave the authorization 18 months before his death. Lucien executed it, yes. But the original decision to remove you from Adrian's life, to prevent the relationship from producing an heir outside the organization's control, that decision was made by the man Adrian spent 18 months avenging. She looked at Adrian across the kitchen. He was watching her face. He couldn't hear the voice, but he was reading her expression, and she knew he was already arriving at something from the change in it, the way the blood moves away from the face when the ground shifts. She lowered the phone. Your father, she said. His expression did not change. Your father is the one who started this. 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Then Adrian Vescari sat down in a chair at the kitchen table, and for the first time since she'd watched him come through the cafe door that morning, he looked like a man who had been hit by something he hadn't seen coming, something that did not care about his training or his discipline or the 22 years of careful architecture he'd built around himself to prevent exactly this, the specific devastation of a truth that rewrites everything that came before it. He sat in the chair and looked at the table. She brought the phone back to her ear. What do you want? She said to Dara Voss. I want Lucien stopped, the woman said. He killed Marcus. He's been cleaning house for 2 years. Anyone who knows the original authorization, anyone who can trace it back to Silvio. I'm the last one. When I'm gone, the record of what Silvio sanctioned disappears with me, and Lucien's version becomes the only version. Why come to us? Because Adrian is the only person with enough standing and enough reason to end this, and because you are the only person he'll move for. She paused. And because your son is the only leverage that works on both of you simultaneously. Is Noah in danger right now? Yes, Dara Voss said. Lucien has a secondary team, not the 2 men from this morning, a different unit, already north of the city, already moving toward the location you're currently at. The breath went out of her. How do you know where we are? Because I've been watching Lucien's network, she said. And his network has been watching Adrian's new phone since the moment he activated it. She looked at the phone in her other hand. The packaged phone, the fresh phone, the phone Adrian had taken from a bag in a safe house that Lucien had pre-positioned. Lucien had sourced the phones. She felt the room tilt slightly. How long? She said. 20 minutes, Dara Voss said. Maybe less. She ended the call and looked at Adrian. He was still sitting in the chair. He hadn't moved. His hands were flat on the table, and he was looking at a middle distance that didn't correspond to anything in the room. Adrian. She put her hand on his arm. We need to move. Right now. He looked up at her. His face was something she had never seen on it before and hoped never to see again. Not the locked room, not the operational control, but the underneath, the raw material that the control had been built to cover. The face of a man whose entire architecture of self has been structurally compromised in a single sentence. My father, he said. We can process this later, she said. Right now there are people coming. He looked at her for 2 more seconds. She watched him make the decision, watched him physically set something down that had enormous weight, watched him fold it and place it somewhere internal that would hold it until he had the space to open it again, watched his face go back to functional. He stood up. Noah, he said. I'll get him. She was already moving to the stairs. She took them 2 at a time, calling Noah's name, and she found him in the back bedroom, standing at the window looking at the trees. Time to go again? He asked. Time to go again, she said. She picked him up, all of his dense, small weight, and carried him down the stairs, and he did not ask questions this time, just held on, his arms around her neck, his face against her shoulder, trusting her. She reached the bottom of the stairs. Adrian was gone. The front door was standing open. Outside, through the open door, she heard the sound of a vehicle on the gravel drive. Not their truck, something heavier. And then she heard Adrian's voice from somewhere she couldn't see, outside, off to the left, saying one word in the particular quiet that meant he was not being cautious. He was being surgically precise about the amount of sound he was making. "Run," he said. She ran. She ran through the back door with Noah's arms locked around her neck and hit the tree line at full speed. The fur swallowed them immediately. The light dropped, the temperature dropped. The ground went from gravel to soft, needle-covered earth that muffled her footsteps and gave her ankles nothing reliable to push against. She ran anyway. Noah had gone completely silent, not frightened silent, something more instinctive. The silence of a small animal that has understood from its mother's body that sound is dangerous and has made the adjustment without being asked. She did not look back. She counted her own breathing, in through the nose, out-controlled, the way she'd learned to do it during the 3 months after Noah was born, when she'd had panic attacks at 2 a.m. standing over his crib, certain that the world was about to come apart. She had practiced breath control as a survival tool long before she understood that it might one day be a literal one. Behind her, back at the house, she heard voices. 2, maybe 3. Doors. The sound of the vehicle she hadn't been able to see from the stairs. She kept moving. The tree line opened briefly onto a shallow creek bed. Rocks, 6 inches of fast cold water, the steep opposite bank. She went through without stopping, the water shocking against her shins, Noah making one small involuntary sound at the cold, and up the bank on the other side using her free hand against the mud slope, tearing fingernails, not registering it. She reached the top and pressed her back against a fir trunk and breathed, listened. Somewhere behind her and to the left, a branch broke. One break. Deliberate wait, someone moving. She pulled Noah tighter and moved right, paralleling the creek, deeper into the trees, away from the sound. Her heart was doing something she could feel in her eardrums. The cold water in her shoes was a specific high-pitched discomfort that her body was telling her was important and her mind was telling her was not. She heard Adrian's voice. Not words, just the tone. Controlled, flat, carrying the specific neutrality that meant he was talking to someone he had no intention of accommodating, somewhere back near the house or between the house and the trees. She couldn't locate him precisely. She stopped behind a cluster of firs wide enough to provide cover and crouched down and shifted Noah from her hip to in front of her, both hands on his face, tilting it up so she could see his eyes in the low silver light coming through the canopy. He looked back at her steadily. "I need you to stay here," she said. Barely a breath. "Right here, behind this tree. Don't move, don't make noise, don't come out until I come back for you. Understand?" "Where are you going?" he whispered. 40 feet, I'll be able to see you the whole time." It was a partial truth. She'd be able to see the tree. That was the most she could promise. He searched her face with the accuracy that always undid her, that specific clear-eyed read that saw through whatever she was performing to whatever she actually was. Then he nodded. He sat down against the base of the tree and pulled his knees to his chest and made himself small with the practical efficiency of a child who had been told to hide before and understood what it required. She straightened. She moved back toward the sound. The creek bed gave her cover if she stayed low. She moved along the near bank, using the slope to stay below sight lines, picking through the rocks carefully enough to minimize sound. The voices ahead were clearer now. 2 men, neither one Adrian. She came up over the bank edge and looked through a gap in the undergrowth. The clearing on the east side of the house, 20 feet of open ground between the tree line and the cedar siding. A black SUV parked nose in at an angle that blocked the original truck's exit route. 2 men she'd never seen standing in the clearing, one by the SUV's driver door, one closer to the house's back corner, both armed. Professional posture, weight forward, scanning. No Lucian, no Adrian visible from this angle. She stayed down and moved left along the tree line, keeping the undergrowth between herself and the clearing, until she reached a position where she could see the front of the house. Adrian was on the porch. He was standing with his hands at his sides and his jacket open, and he was talking to a man she hadn't seen before. Not one of the two in the clearing, a third, standing at the bottom of the porch steps. The third man was holding a phone up, screen facing Adrian. She couldn't see what was on the screen from this distance. Whatever it was, Adrian's face did something she felt from 40 feet away through undergrowth and tree trunks. Not the locked room, not the controlled blank. Something beneath both of them, something that had roots in a part of him she hadn't known existed before today. She moved closer. She moved through the last of the undergrowth on her stomach, elbows in the needles, face inches from the wet ground, until she reached a position behind a root mass large enough to conceal her. The phone screen showed Noah. A live feed. Noah sitting against the base of the fir tree, with his knees to his chest, his face turned down, exactly where she'd left him. Someone was watching her son right now from a position she hadn't located. The understanding went through her like the water from the creek, total, immediate, cold enough to take the breath. "There are two ways this works," the third man said. He was American. Pacific Northwest accent, something nasal in the vowels. He was not Lucian's type. Not silver-haired, not silver-tongued, practical and functional rather than elegant. A tool rather than an architect. "You come with us, we take you to have a conversation. The kid stays where he is. Or you don't come, and we demonstrate that we know exactly where he is." "Where's Lucien?" Adrian said. "Waiting. I want to talk to him." "That's the goal." The man lowered the phone slightly. "This doesn't need to go sideways. This is a conversation. Lucien's been clear about that." "Lucien has been clear about a number of things today," Adrian said, "and I found his clarity unreliable." "Mr. Viscari, tell me who's on my son," Adrian said. The man paused. The pause was small, but she caught it. The micro-hesitation of someone recalculating how much to confirm. "We have eyes on his position. That's all I'm authorized to." "Is the person watching him the same person who positioned that sedan this morning?" Another pause. "Tell Lucien," Adrian said, "that I'll meet him. Where he wants, when he wants. And tell him that when this is over, I am going to remember every choice that was made today by every person who was party to it, starting with you." The flatness of the last sentence was the flattest thing she'd heard from him yet. Not a threat. An accounting. Something being entered into a ledger. The man with the phone seemed to understand the distinction. He stepped back slightly. He lifted the phone to his ear. Serena did not wait to hear the rest of the conversation. She had a location from the live feed. The angle of the camera looking at Noah had come from above and to the south, which meant someone elevated and south of Noah's position. She had the creek to Noah's east. She had the main clearing to his west. South meant back toward the access road, where the tree cover was thinner because the road had been cut through it. She went south. She moved faster than was careful, and more carefully than was fast. A compromise that left her neither safe nor efficient, but moving, which was what mattered. The undergrowth thinned. She saw the access road through the trees, the pale line of gravel, the ruts from the SUV's passage, the point where the firs resumed on the other side. In the firs on the south side of the road, 8 feet up, in the crook of a trunk where 2 major branches diverged, a man was sitting with a tablet propped against the bark. She looked at him for 2 full seconds from the cover of the undergrowth. He was watching the tablet, not the trees. His eyes were on the screen, on Noah's position feed, with the relaxed inattention of someone who has determined his target is stationary and has therefore downgraded his immediate alert level. She had no weapon. She had her body weight and the element of surprise and approximately 15 feet of open ground between herself and the base of the tree he was sitting in, and the cold knowledge that if he heard her coming and called out, the 2 men in the clearing would move on Noah's position within 45 seconds. She came out of the undergrowth without sound. She covered the 15 feet in the way she had run track in high school for 2 undistinguished years. Not fast, but mechanically efficient, her foot strike landing heel-toe rather than heel-flat. The particular silence of someone who has spent 5 years stepping around a sleeping child in a small apartment and has unconsciously developed the skill. He heard her at 4 feet. He started to turn. She hit the tree with both hands and went up it, not climbing, using the first major branch as a step, the physics of momentum carrying her the additional 4 feet to the second branch where he was sitting, and she did not think about what she was doing because thinking would have required a half-second she didn't have. She just moved, and her right elbow connected with the side of his face with the combined weight of a 130-pound body that had launched itself up 8 feet of Douglas fir on adrenaline and the specific fury of a mother who has located the person watching her child. The tablet came free of his grip. She caught it against her chest before it could fall. He grabbed her arm. Strong grip, her left arm, wrenching her balance, and she held the branch with her right and let her weight go sideways, and the shift pulled him forward and off the branch, and he dropped the 8 feet to the ground with a sound she felt in her teeth. He wasn't unconscious. She could hear him moving below. She was not going to be in this tree in 5 seconds. She dropped, bending her knees, landing in the soft needle-covered earth 2 feet from him, tucking her shoulder and rolling the way she'd once seen on a safety video for something unrelated and had apparently filed for future reference. She came up on her feet. He was getting up. She hit him with the tablet, the flat face of it across his ear, and it made a sound like a board against a wall, and he went back down and this time did not immediately get up. She stood over him, breathing through her nose, her left arm aching from the wrenching, her knees hot from the drop, her hands shaking with the particular fine tremor that arrives after the adrenaline peaks rather than during it. She took his radio from his belt. She took his phone. She left him and went back through the trees to Noah. He was exactly where she'd left him. He looked up when she came through the trees, and his face did the thing it did when he'd been scared and was choosing not to show it. The specific flatness, the suppressed lower lip, her own face 30 years younger. "I said 40 feet, he whispered. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." She picked him up. He didn't argue this time. The radio in her hand crackled. She didn't answer it. She moved back north along the creek bed, keeping the water between her and the clearing, until she came around to the north side of the house where neither of the visible men had been positioned. The front of the house was empty. The third man and Adrian were gone. The SUV was still there. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went to it. The keys were in it. She stared at the keys for the half-second required to process how deliberately wrong that was. No professional leaves keys in a vehicle in a live operation. It was the kind of mistake that wasn't a mistake. And then she understood. It was an invitation. Someone wanted her in this vehicle going in a specific direction. She heard Adrian's voice then, from inside the house, through an open window, clearly audible in the cold forest air, saying something she couldn't make out in full, but with a tone she had heard once before, a long time ago, when she had not understood what it meant. She understood now. It was the tone of a man who has decided the conversation is over. She did not get in the SUV. She went to the house's side door and opened it, and went in through the laundry room with Noah on her hip and the radio in her hand. The kitchen was empty, the document still on the table, the bag still open. She took the utility knife from the bag and put it in her back pocket and moved to the kitchen doorway and listened. Adrian's voice from the main room, and another voice she recognized, not from today, but from the phone call. Lucien Moretti was in the house. She had not heard him arrive. She had not heard a vehicle, which meant he had come through the tree line on foot and entered while she was south of the access road, and the third man was running his extraction conversation on the porch. He had been inside the house while she and Noah were in the trees. She stayed in the kitchen doorway. "Sit down," Lucien was saying. His voice was exactly as it had been in the safe house, measured, warm in the way of a practiced warmth, carrying no urgency, as if he were proposing they discuss something over the coffee she'd spilled that morning 10 years ago rather than 7 hours ago. "I'm standing," Adrian said. Adrian, patient. "I've known you since you were 23 years old. I taught you how to read a room. I taught you how to read a contract. I taught you half of what you know about running an organization." A pause. "Sit down." "You knew about my father," Adrian said. A silence. "He authorized it," Adrian said. "You executed it. 7 years of me believing the relationship ended. 7 years of a child growing up without... Your father made a decision to protect the organization. He made a decision to protect his own structure, not the organization. Those are the same thing." They were never the same thing. Adrian's voice was the flattest she'd ever heard it. He used you to remove everyone who threatened his control, including me, including my choices. He loved you, Lucian said. He managed me. The words were precise and cold and final. The same way he managed every asset. And when I became a liability, when a relationship threatened to produce an heir he hadn't approved, he made a resource allocation decision. You say that like it's cold. It was cold. He kept you safe. He kept himself safe, Adrian said. I spent 18 months dismantling the people he told me were responsible for his death. I restructured territories, called in debts, burned alliances, all of it based on your intelligence. All of it serving his actual plan, which was to leave you with a cleaner structure to step into. Serena understood the full shape of it then, standing in the kitchen doorway with Noah breathing quietly on her hip. Not just the fake death, not just the separated relationship. The war Adrian had fought after Silvio Viscari died. The 18 months of violence that had reshaped the organization's territorial map had been engineered to consolidate power in the way that best served Lucien's long-term position. Silvio had been the original architect. Lucien had inherited the blueprint. When did you decide to kill him? Adrian said. The room was quiet. When did you decide my father was no longer useful? Adrian said. She heard Lucien move, a chair, weight shifting. Your father's death was what? Flat. Another silence. Was the car accident in Vancouver, Adrian said. The same accident that killed Marcus Webb 2 years later. She heard it in the silence that followed, the specific quality of a silence that confirms rather than denies. Not a confession. Something more precise. The silence of a man who has decided not to construct another lie because the person across from him has already completed the sentence. He was going to undo it, Lucian said finally. The warmth had left his voice for the first time. What was underneath was not cold exactly, something older, something that had made very old decisions and had made peace with them. He found out about the child. Serena was already 4 months along, but I hadn't known, and then I did, and I told him, and he... A pause. He said he wanted to bring her back. He wanted to acknowledge the child. He wanted to restructure everything he'd spent 30 years building to accommodate a decision he'd made 3 months earlier that he was suddenly unwilling to live with. Another pause. 30 years. So you removed him, Adrian said. I protected what we built. You protected your own position. I protected the organization. There is no organization, Adrian said. There is you. There has only ever been you. My father's structure, his alliances, his networks, all of it has been running in service of what you were building underneath it for 20 years. I see it now. I should have seen it before. You're very good, Lucian said. You were always very good. Better than your father in some ways. But you have his weakness. Tell me. You believe that the people you love are separate from the work. That there is a line. Your father believed it too, right up until he didn't, and then he made a sentimental decision that would have cost 20 years of careful construction. A pause. You're making the same decision right now. No, Adrian said. I'm making a different one. She heard something that might have been a chair scraping. She moved from the kitchen doorway to the edge of the main room and looked around the frame. Adrian was standing 6 feet from Lucien. He had not drawn the handgun from the table. Sorry, he'd left it there, visible, on the folding surface between the stove and the window. It was a deliberate choice, she understood, because Lucien was also armed and the distance and angles were not favorable, and Adrian was not making a play for the gun. He was making something else. Lucien looked at her the moment she appeared in the door frame. Not surprised. He'd known she was there. He'd probably known since she'd come in through the side door. His eyes moved from her to Noah on her hip, and back to her face with the clinical assessment of someone calculating variables. You took down my man in the south tree line, he said. He had a tablet, she said. It seemed rude. Something moved in Lucian's face that might have been appreciation on a different day under different circumstances. You're exactly what I'd have expected from the combination, he said. That's unfortunate. Because it makes us harder to manage, she said. Because it means the child is going to be exactly what neither of us can afford. He looked at Noah directly. He has the birthmark. Noah, to his credit, looked back at Lucien with the specific blankness that small children sometimes produce when they understand that a situation requires them to give nothing away, even when they don't know exactly what they're withholding. Left wrist, Lucy Sayan said, crescent-shaped. I knew about it the moment I knew about the pregnancy. That's when I understood that the original plan, the removal, the clean separation, wasn't going to hold. A child with the mark changes every inheritance protocol we have. He's 5 years old, Serena said. Her voice was level and very hard. He's an institutional structure, Lucien said, with the genuine regret of a man who actually wishes things were different, which was the worst possible version of it. I'm sorry, he's a very small institutional structure, but an institutional structure nonetheless. Lucien, Adrian's voice. The older man looked at him. I want you to hear me clearly, Adrian said. I am going to dismantle every financial structure you have built using my family's name. Every account, every front company, every property holding, every political relationship that runs through the Viscari network. I'm going to take it apart piece by piece, and I'm going to make sure that when I am finished, there is nothing left for you to inherit or control or leverage. No structure, no network, no organization, nothing. You'd burn it all. I'd burn it all. To protect them. To end this. Lucien looked at him for a long moment. The warmth was fully gone now. What was left was something she might have called sadness if she were being generous, or calculation if she were being accurate. You'll burn 20 years of your own work, Lucien said. I built it on a lie, Adrian said. Every stone of it was laid on what you and my father manufactured. It was never mine. It was always yours. I was always yours. He paused. I'm not anymore. The silence had the specific texture of something ending, and then the window above the wood stove exploded inward. Not a gunshot. Something thrown, fast and heavy, a rock or a tool, something that took out the glass in a single implosion and was followed immediately by two things. The radio on Serena's belt crackling to life with a single word, now, and the sound of the front door coming off its hinges. She turned with Noah. The third man from the porch was in the doorway, and one of the two men from the clearing was coming through the destroyed window frame, coat up over his face against the glass. Lucien moved, not toward Adrian, toward Serena and Noah. She spun away from him and her back hit the wall, and she put Noah behind her body with both arms extended flat against the wall on either side of him. A physical cage, the only architecture she had available. Lucien stopped 2 feet from her. He looked at Noah over her shoulder. I don't want to hurt either of you, he said. Then don't, she said. A shot. From across the room, not a handgun, the sound was wrong, something larger, and the man coming through the window stopped and the man in the doorway stopped, and Lucia turned. Adrian had the handgun from the table. He had not fired at Lucien. He had fired at the ceiling, once, the crack of it still in the air, the plaster dust still falling. Everyone in the room was looking at him. Step away from them, he said to Lucien. Lucien turned back to Serena and Noah. He did not step away. He looked at her with the expression of a man making a genuine assessment of whether the person behind him will actually pull the trigger. She looked at Adrian over Lucien's shoulder. She had been wrong earlier. She had thought the most human thing she'd seen from him was the voice in the kitchen going rough around the edges. She had been wrong. This was it. A man standing with a gun in a room where the only thing between its use and everything he wanted to protect was the body of a man who had raised him and lied to him and murdered his father, and spent 20 years constructing the precise cage of loyalty that had made it possible. His hand was steady. The room was completely still. And then Darravos walked through the destroyed front doorway with two men she didn't know and a badge she did, holding a phone showing a live transmission she didn't need to see clearly to understand had been running for the last 6 minutes, and said to Lucien Moretti in the flat voice of someone who has been waiting a very long time to say one specific thing. Federal Task Force. Don't move. Lucien's face went through 5 expressions in 2 seconds. The last one settled into something she would have called resignation, if the word hadn't felt too small for what was being resigned to. 20 years of architecture, The accumulated weight of every decision made in the name of a structure that had just been confirmed on a live transmission to have been built on murder and fraud and the systematic destruction of the people it claimed to serve. He turned to Adrian. "You called her," Lucian said. "She called me," Adrian said. "I called back." She remembered the new phone. The first call Adrian had made from it, in the truck. The one call she hadn't been able to hear clearly. She had assumed it was operational. She had been right, just not in the direction she'd been thinking. Lucian looked at Adrian with the expression of a man who has been beaten by a move he should have anticipated, made by a player he trained himself. Darvos's people moved into the room. In the chaos of the next 30 seconds, the two men from the clearing being brought in through the front, Lucien being separated from the room with a competence that suggested significant preparation, the radio on Serena's belt producing a burst of confused traffic that then went abruptly silent. She stood against the wall with Noah pressed behind her and watched Adrian stand in the middle of the room with the handgun at his side and his face doing something she had no name for. Not relief, not victory, not the satisfaction of a problem solved. Something more like a man standing in the wreckage of a building he has lived in his entire life, understanding for the first time what it was actually built of, and deciding what, if anything, to carry out of it. Noah reached around her hip. He put his small hand on Adrian's wrist, the left one, the one not holding the gun, and Adrian looked down at him with the expression that broke through everything, the one with no management in it at all. "Is the bad part over?" Noah asked. Adrian crouched down. He set the gun on the floor. He looked at his son, 5 years old, steady-eyed, crescent birthmark on the left wrist, his mother's directness in the line of his jaw, and said, in a voice that was the quietest and most human thing she had heard from him in 7 years or possibly ever, "Not yet." Noah considered this with great seriousness. "Okay," he said, "but soon?" Outside, through the destroyed front door, Serena could see the first of 2 black federal vehicles pulling up the gravel drive. Somewhere in the tree line to the south, the man she'd knocked out of a Douglas fir was going to need medical attention. Inside the house, Darvos was on her phone relaying confirmation of a live transmission that would take months to fully unpack in federal court. And Lucien Moretti was standing at the edge of the porch, with his hands being secured behind him, looking out at the firs with the expression of a man reviewing the distance between where he'd intended to end up and where he'd actually arrived, and finding the gap to be, after 20 years, precisely as wide as the choices he'd made to create it. Adrian straightened up. He looked at Serena. She looked back. Between them, Noah had found the second muffin in the pocket of his rain slicker and was eating it with the uncomplicated appetite of a child who has been through a genuinely terrible morning and has decided that food is the appropriate response. "Darvos," Serena said. "You trust her." "I trust the transmission," Adrian said. "The transmission I trust." "What does she want?" "Everything she said." Lucien stopped. The record preserved. He paused. "And I suspect she wants immunity for what she knows about the rest of the network, which she's going to get. And you." He was quiet for a moment. "I made a call in the truck," he said. "I put the transmission in place before I knew the full scope of what Lucien had done, before I knew about my father." He looked at the floor briefly. "I made the call because I understood that the only thing that ends this, all of it, not just Lucien, the whole structure, is exposure, documentation, sunlight." He looked up. "I can't dismantle it from inside it. I've been inside it my entire life. But I can hand the architecture to people whose job is demolition." She understood what he was saying. She understood what it cost. "Everything," she said. "Everything," he said. The federal vehicle reached the end of the driveway and stopped. Doors opened. People moved with the particular efficiency of a prepared operation rather than a reactive one. Darvos came back through the front door and looked at Adrian. "We need to move," she said. "There are 2 more of Lucien's secondary team unaccounted for. We're not secure here." Adrian nodded. He looked at Serena. He looked at Noah. He picked up the gun from the floor and handed it to Darvos without looking at it. The specific gesture of a man surrendering something he has carried for a long time and has decided to put down. "Let's go," he said. Serena took Noah's hand. They walked out through the destroyed front door together into the cold silver afternoon, and the last thing she saw before she crossed the threshold was the folded property document still on the kitchen table. Marcus Webb's name, the address of her first Seattle apartment, the paper evidence of a plan that had started before she'd known there was a plan. Sitting exactly where she'd left it, waiting for the people whose job it was to read such things and understand what they meant and build from them the shape of 20 years of deliberate, patient harm. She stepped over the threshold. Behind her, the house stood empty and cold and full of documents that would take months to fully read. Ahead of her, Noah pulled her hand and pointed up at the Douglas firs where the silver light was coming through in columns, turning the afternoon into something that looked, despite everything, almost clean. "Mom," he said. "Yeah." "That man who fell out of the tree," Noah said. She closed her eyes for 1 second. "Was that you?" he asked. She opened her eyes. "We'll talk about it later," she said. "That means yes," Noah told Adrian. And Adrian Vescari, surrounded by federal agents and the wreckage of the last day of the life he'd known, looked at his son with an expression she was going to spend a long time thinking about and said, very quietly, so only the three of them could hear it, "That definitely means yes." They put Lucien Moretti in a federal vehicle at 4:17 in the afternoon. Serena watched from the porch steps with Noah asleep against her shoulder. He'd gone out like a switch being thrown the moment they'd settled him in the back of a federal SUV 40 minutes earlier. The specific collapse of a small body that has been running on stress hormones and stolen muffins since 9 in the morning and has simply exhausted its fuel. She'd carried him back out to the porch when the vehicle processed through and the site became, in the functional bureaucratic sense, a scene rather than an active threat. And she'd sat on the cold cedar steps with her son's weight on her shoulder and watched the procedural machinery of consequence do its work. Lucien walked to the vehicle without being pushed. That was the thing she kept returning to. He walked under his own direction, hands secured behind him, chin level, the bearing of a man who has decided that whatever else is stripped from him, deportment remains. He did not look at Adrian, who was standing 20 feet away talking to Dara Voss in the low, rapid way of two people exchanging information against a deadline. He did not look at Serena. He looked at Noah. Once. For perhaps 2 seconds. The expression on his face was not what she'd expected. Not hatred, not calculation, not even the specific cool regret she'd have predicted from everything she'd seen of him. It was something older and more complicated. Something that might have been in a different man under different circumstances. Grief. For a plan. For a structure. For 20 years of work that had produced, in its final accounting, a 5-year-old asleep on his mother's shoulder and a federal evidence package that would take 3 prosecutors 18 months to fully map. Then the vehicle door closed, and Lucien Moretti was behind tinted glass, and the vehicle moved down the gravel drive and turned onto the county road and disappeared. She exhaled. She had not been aware she was holding it. Dara Voss came to her 20 minutes later when the immediate sight processing had reached a stage where she had a margin of time. She was a compact woman in her early 40s, practical clothes, the kind of face that had once been open and had been trained into controlled neutrality by years of work that required it. She sat on the step beside Serena without asking if the step was available and looked out at the firs. "How much of the last 6 years were you watching?" Serena asked. "We built the web connection 14 months ago," Dara said. "Before that, I was inside the network in a different capacity." She paused. "I knew about you for approximately 2 years. I knew about the child for 18 months. Serena looked at her. "I couldn't move without the transmission," Dara said. "I needed Adrian in the room with Lucien making statements. I needed the connection between Lucien's current operation and Silvio's original authorization on record. Without it, Lucien's attorneys would have had him out in 72 hours, and I'd have lost every asset I'd spent 6 years placing." She paused again, with the quality of a person who has rehearsed this explanation and finds it no easier for the rehearsal. "I'm sorry that what I needed required you to have the morning you had." "That's a very clean way to say it." "Yes," Dara said. "It is." They sat in silence for a moment. "The 2 men unaccounted for," Serena said. "From Lucien's secondary team. Located. 1 in custody as of an hour ago. 1—" She stopped. "1 is still a concern. He's a contractor, not an organizational member. We have his identity. We have his network. We'll have him within 48 hours. She looked at Serena directly. He's not a threat to you specifically. His contract was operational, not relational. When Lucien goes into federal custody, the contract has no enforcing party. You're sure? I'm not sure of anything, Dara said with the flatness of professional honesty, but I'm confident. There's a difference. Serena accepted that. It was at minimum an honest answer. Adrian, she said. Dara looked at her. What happens to him? Serena said. The pause before Dara's answer was not a legal pause or a tactical pause. It was the pause of someone measuring what a person can carry and what they need set down first. He cooperated with an active federal investigation, Dara said. He provided transmission evidence, financial documentation, and first-hand testimony regarding Lucia Moretti's organizational structure, Marcus Webb's murder, and the circumstances of Silvio Vescari's death. He also provided, voluntarily without negotiation, a complete mapping of the Vescari network's financial architecture going back 12 years. Everything, Serena said. Everything. Dara looked back at the furs. In exchange, the federal agreement covers his cooperation fully. He's not being charged. He will, however, spend the next 18 months working with investigators and forensic accountants to dismantle what he handed over. He can't leave the country. He can't access the network's assets while they're being processed, which means, practically, he's going to be, for the first time in his adult life, a private citizen with a restricted income and a significant amount of time to account for. Serena took that in. He agreed to all of it, she said. He proposed most of it, Dara said. She didn't say anything for a moment. He didn't tell me, she said. Not accusatory, just the fact of it. He made the call before he knew the full scope of what Lucien had done, Dara said. He made it in the truck. Before the house, before your conversation about Silvio. She paused. He made it because it was the only way to end it cleanly, and because he'd already decided what mattered more than the structure. She looked at Noah. I don't think the conversation you need to have with him requires my input. She stood up from the step and looked down at Serena with the expression of a woman who has been professionally hard for a long time and knows it. The contractor, she said. 48 hours. After that, you're clear. I'll have someone on your location until then. She walked back toward the federal vehicles. Serena sat on the step with Noah's weight on her shoulder and the cold coming up through the cedar planking beneath her and thought about a man making a phone call in a moving truck before he knew the worst of it, before the house and the window and the gun on the floor, making the specific decision that renders everything else consequent. She thought about what kind of person does that. She thought about what kind of person she had believed him to be, and what kind he had turned out to be, and whether those two things were different or whether she had simply been 23 and unable to see far enough into someone to locate the part of them that was real rather than performed. She thought about 7 years. She didn't resolve any of it. She sat on the step and let Noah sleep and watched the Douglas firs hold still in the cold afternoon air. And somewhere in the middle of that, she started to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, nothing that would wake Noah or draw anyone's attention. Just the specific quiet release of a body that has been holding something at maximum compression for approximately 9 hours and has reached the limit of what compression can contain. She cried for about 4 minutes, then she stopped. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. She looked at the tree line. She waited for Adrian. He came to the porch 40 minutes later, when the federal vehicles had thinned to 2, and the site had the particular exhausted stillness of a place where something significant has occurred and is now being slowly converted into paperwork. He sat on the step she'd left available, not close, a considered distance, the distance of a man who understands that proximity requires permission and has no interest in assuming it. He looked at Noah. Still out, she said. Good. Silence. The kind that has weight rather than emptiness. You made the call in the truck, she said. Yes. Before the house. Yes. Before you knew about your father. He was quiet for a moment. I knew enough, he said. I knew someone had built something underneath what I was running, and that whoever it was had used me to build it, and that the only way to stop it from continuing, regardless of what happened to Lucien specifically, was to make the whole architecture visible. He paused. The specific details of who authorized what didn't change the decision. They just changed what it cost. She thought about that. What does it cost? He looked at the gravel drive where the federal vehicles had left ruts. Everything I built, which was, as it turns out, primarily a structure that served someone else's interests under my name. So possibly nothing, depending on how you count. You count it as something, she said. I count it as something, he said. I'm allowed to count it as something even if I chose to give it up. She looked at him. He looked back. The afternoon light had gone from silver to something thinner and more amber, the light of a day running out. Your father, she said. His jaw moved once. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't require processing, he said. No. I'm also not going to process it on a porch in front of a sleeping 5-year-old with 2 federal agents 20 meters away. No, she said. Later. Later, he agreed. Silence again, different from before, slightly less weight. What do you do now? She said. Practically. 18 months of cooperation, he said. Financial mapping, testimony. After that, he stopped. Something moved through his face. I have no idea. I've been in or adjacent to the organization since I was 19 years old. I don't have a non-operational skill set. She almost said something. I can make coffee, he said. Badly, apparently according to at least one source. She looked at him sharply. He was looking at Noah. She looked at Noah too. And then she did something she hadn't done once in the entire day. She laughed. Not long, not loud. The specific involuntary sound of something escaping before it can be properly managed. Dark and real and over in 3 seconds. Adrian looked at her. There it is, he said quietly. She didn't ask him what he meant. She knew what he meant. The second federal vehicle left at 6:03. Dara's people left 2 agents in a car at the end of the gravel drive and drove away. The house behind them was going to be a federal site for the next several days while documentation was processed. Dara's team would arrange alternate accommodation, a hotel in the city, somewhere neutral, somewhere none of the remaining threads of the night led. They drove back towards Seattle in a federal vehicle with a driver who did not make conversation. Noah woke up 40 minutes in and looked out the window at the passing dark for a while, and then asked Adrian, with the directness of a child who has spent a day around a person and has made certain preliminary assessments, "Do you know how to play cards?" Adrian looked at him. "Yes." "What games?" "Most of them." Noah considered this. "Can you teach me one?" "When we stop somewhere and have a deck of cards?" "Mom won't let me play poker," Noah said. "That seems reasonable," Adrian said. "She said when I'm older." "That also seems reasonable." "How old?" "Ask your mother." Noah turned to her. She said 35, and he turned back to Adrian with the expression of someone reporting a miscarriage of justice. And Adrian said 35 was probably right. And Noah turned back to the window and said, under his breath but audibly, that 35 was a long time. It was the first ordinary conversation of the day. She sat with it. The strangeness of it. The texture of something small and functional occurring in the space where 6 hours ago there had been gunshots and broken glass, and the specific weight of a man learning that his entire history had been curated by other people's intentions. She filed it carefully. She was going to need to remember that ordinary things could still occur. The hotel was a business chain in Belltown. Clean, anonymous, 2 adjoining rooms that Dara's people had arranged in advance. Someone had brought a bag of supplies, Noah's size in clothes, because someone had assessed what a 5-year-old would need overnight, which struck her as simultaneously professional and deeply strange. Toothbrushes. A deck of cards. Noah found the cards immediately. He brought them to Adrian with the directness of a person who has identified a resource and intends to deploy it. Adrian sat on the hotel bed and shuffled the deck with the ease of someone for whom card handling is a developed skill, and dealt a simple game she recognized as rummy, and Noah sat cross-legged across from him and studied his cards with the focused seriousness of a child who intends to win. She stood in the doorway between the 2 rooms. She watched a man she had grieved for 7 years teach her son the rules of a card game on a hotel bedspread, and she did not try to make it into anything other than what it was, which was a thing that was happening. A first thing, one in a sequence of first things that would follow from the morning, none of them certain and none of them simple and all of them real. Noah won the first hand. He was excessively proud of this. Adrian reshuffled without comment and dealt again. She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and called Marcus from the anchor and told him she was fine and that she was sorry about the morning and that she'd explain when she could. He said, "Okay," in the voice of someone for whom okay means I have approximately 60 questions, but I understand this is not the moment. She thanked him and hung up. She called her landlord. She left a message about the apartment. She would need a few days before she could come back. She would be in touch. She was fine. She sat with the phone in her lap. She thought about the anchor, the carafe, the table by the window she'd refilled without being asked, the specific texture of an ordinary morning, the kind she'd constructed carefully over 4 years and had believed was hers. It was still hers. That was the thing she kept needing to remind herself. The morning had happened. The day had happened. But on the other side of it, still her cafe job, still her son, still the apartment with the crack in the kitchen tile. Still hers. Altered in the way that things are altered when enormous events pass through them. The way a room is different after a storm, even when the furniture hasn't moved, but still hers. She lay back on the hotel bed in her clothes and closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She listened to the low sound of Adrian's voice through the doorway, patient and level, explaining the rules when Noah pushed back on a play, and Noah's voice, high and certain, insisting that his interpretation was correct, and the sound of cards on a bedspread, and outside the hotel window the specific low continuous sound of Seattle at night, traffic, distant, the city processing itself regardless of what had occurred in it. At some point, Noah came in and climbed onto the bed beside her without announcement and fell asleep again with his feet against her hip, a position he'd been defaulting to since he was 2, and she put her hand on his back and felt him breathe. She stared at the ceiling. Adrian appeared in the doorway. He looked at Noah, then at her. "He cheated," Adrian said. "He always cheats," she said. "I don't know where he learned it. He's very good at it." "I know." He leaned against the doorframe. He'd taken off the ruined jacket. It was somewhere in the Douglas firs, she assumed, or in the house. She'd stopped tracking it. And his shirt was rumpled and damp at the cuffs and collar. He looked like a man at the end of the longest day of his life, which was accurate. "Dara called," he said. "The second contractor. They have him." She let the breath out. 48 hours, she said, Serena said. She was optimistic, Adrian said. 6 hours. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she said, when the cooperation period is over, the 18 months. Yes. Where are you going? He was quiet for long enough that she turned her head to look at him in the doorframe. I don't know, he said. It came out with the specific honesty of someone who genuinely doesn't know and has stopped constructing answers for things they don't know. I know what I'm not. I know the shape of what I was, and that I'm not going back to it. He paused. Beyond that, I don't know. She looked at him. That's the most honest thing you've said today, she said. Today has been an unusually honest day, he said. She turned back to the ceiling. Noah starts kindergarten in September, she said. I know. He's going to have questions about you, about why you weren't, about all of it. I know. Some of those questions don't have clean answers. No, he said, they don't. Can you be in a room with him without clean answers? She said. The pause was different from his other pauses. Not tactical, not calculated. Just a man sitting with a question that went somewhere deeper than strategy. I think the honest answer, he said slowly, is that I've never tried. I've never been in a situation where the answers weren't clean, and I was still required to be in the room. He paused. But I want to try. I understand that wanting and being able to are different things. I understand that wanting doesn't create a right. He looked at Noah. I want to try. She was quiet for a while. One thing at a time, she said finally. Yes. September is a long way from today. Yes. We can talk about September when it isn't the same day as everything else. Yes, he said. And then after a pause, yes, thank you. She looked at him. He looked like he wasn't sure why he'd said thank you, or wasn't sure it was sufficient, or possibly wasn't sure what the appropriate expression was for the specific thing he was feeling, which was likely because there was no established protocol for it. No organizational procedure, no structure within which to file the experience of sitting at the end of the worst and most clarifying day of your life in a hotel doorway, looking at a child who has your eyes and a woman who rebuilt herself entirely without you and managed, somehow, to do it well. He pushed off the doorframe. "I'll take the chair," he said. "In your room, if that's It's fine," she said. He went to get the chair from the desk and set it in the corner and sat in it with the particular upright quality that she suspected was structural for him rather than intentional. A man who did not know how to fully relax in a space that wasn't controlled, or possibly a man who had never tried, or possibly a man who was going to need to learn an entirely different relationship with the concept of a room being safe. That was also for later. She closed her eyes. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, she half woke and looked at the corner, and Adrian was still in the chair, his head slightly forward, asleep in the way of someone who has trained themselves to sleep in positions that allow for fast waking, upright, and contained and restless even in unconsciousness. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the cafe. She'd thought about the cafe several times today in the gaps between more urgent things, the way the mind returns to the specific gravity of an ordinary life, when the extraordinary one becomes too heavy to hold continuously. She thought about the counter and the morning light through the front window and the sound of the espresso machine and Darnell banging things in the kitchen with his specific rhythmic discontent. She had always wanted to own it. Not the anchor specifically. The anchor was someone else's. She was labor, not ownership, which was a distinction she'd been fine with while she was surviving and was increasingly not fine with now that survival had become something more like living. She had saved, quietly and methodically over 4 years, the specific discipline of a person who has decided on a thing and is prepared to take the long route to it. She had a number in her head. She had always had a number in her head. It was not anymore as far away as it had been on the morning she'd walked into work and spilled coffee on a ghost. She closed her eyes again. She slept. 14 months passed, not quickly and not simply, and not in the way that time passes in the summary of a story, with the rough edges smoothed and the difficult parts compressed into manageable segments. It passed the way actual time passes, one morning at a time, one specific conversation at a time, one decision requiring a choice between 2 imperfect options at a time. The federal cooperation took 11 months instead of 18. Adrian's documentation was thorough in a way that the forensic accountants had not expected. Not because he had been preparing for this moment, but because the organizational mind that had made him good at running a network also made him good at mapping one. And the map he produced was sufficiently complete that the investigator's timeline accelerated significantly. Lucian Moretti entered a federal plea arrangement at month 7. He did not, in the end, fight the evidence. There was nothing to fight with. The transmission from the house, combined with the financial architecture Adrian had laid bare, combined with Darvas's 6 years of placement inside the network, produced a case of a specific thoroughness that left his attorneys with the choice between a negotiated outcome and no outcome at all. He took the negotiated outcome. He received 18 years. He was 61 years old. Serena read the sentencing in a newspaper at the counter of the Anchor on a Tuesday morning. An actual newspaper, physical, because she still bought one on Tuesdays in the way of a habit she'd developed during the years before the smartphone made it unnecessary, a small, stubborn, ordinary thing she'd held on to. She read the paragraph twice. She set the paper down. Darnell said something from the kitchen that she didn't catch, and she said, "What?" And he repeated it, and it was something about the coffee inventory being low, and she told him she'd order it, and she did, and the morning continued. That was all. That was, after 14 months and everything that had preceded it, all the ceremony she had available for Lucian Moretti. A paragraph, a cup of coffee getting low, an inventory order. It seemed about right. The property deal for the cafe had closed at month 9. The owner, a man in his 70s who had been looking for an exit for 3 years, had taken an offer she'd assembled from 4 years of quiet saving and one conversation with a financial consultant she'd found through a community business program. It was not a large cafe. It was not in a fashionable neighborhood. The equipment was aging, and the lease on the space had 2 years remaining before renegotiation. She had looked at all of this and said yes. She repainted the interior herself over a weekend in October, with Noah on a step stool beside her holding the second roller with the excessive seriousness of a child who has been given an important job and intends to execute it perfectly, and who therefore painted one section of wall approximately 14 times. She let him. The wall looked fine. She changed the name. She kept the menu mostly the same. The regulars had opinions, and the regulars' opinions were, as a practical matter, the business. But she added 3 things she'd been thinking about for years, items with specific personal histories that she'd been making at home for a long time, and which tasted better than the comparable options currently on the menu. By month 2 of ownership, 2 of the 3 additions had become the most frequently ordered items in their category. Darnell said "I told you so," which was not accurate. He hadn't told her anything, but she let him have it. Adrian came in on the first Tuesday of each month, not because she'd asked him to and not because they had discussed it. He had simply appeared on the first Tuesday of the month after the hotel night, and then the first Tuesday of the month after that, and at some point it had become the specific gravity of a pattern without either of them naming it as such. He always came in the morning after the rush had peaked. He always took the corner booth. He always ordered the same thing, coffee, black, one of the 3 items she'd added to the menu, whichever was available. He was always alone. Noah knew he was coming on those days. She did not know exactly how he knew, whether Adrian had told him or whether he'd simply learned to read the calendar the way children learn to read the rhythms of their households, absorbing information that no one explicitly provides. He started asking, around month 3, if he could stay for the morning on the first Tuesday. She said yes. He did homework in the corner booth. He and Adrian played cards sometimes between the breakfast rush and the lunch prep, when the cafe was quiet enough that she could leave the counter for 20 minutes. She watched them from behind the espresso machine. She was learning to watch without interpreting too quickly, to let things be what they were rather than what she needed them to be or feared they would become. It was work. It was specific daily work, the unglamorous kind, the kind with no visible result that you did anyway because the alternative was to stop doing it and live with the consequences of that. Adrian was not, by any natural measure, suited to the role of a man spending Tuesday mornings in a small cafe playing cards with a 6-year-old. He was too still. He took up space in a room in a way that was not aggressive, but that was unmistakable, the quality of someone who had spent decades being the most consequential person in whatever environment he entered and had not yet entirely unlearned it. He didn't make small talk with the other customers. He didn't fill silences unnecessarily. He said what he meant with a directness that Noah found entirely natural, and that adults in the cafe sometimes found unsettling. But Noah had shown him, apparently, a card game he'd invented himself, the rules of which changed according to Noah's internal logic, and which Adrian played with absolute patience, and no evidence of the frustration that the game's structural incoherence would have produced in most adults. She had asked Adrian about it once, after Noah had gone to wash his hands, and they'd had 90 seconds without him. "He cheats," Adrian had said, "but the game's rules are sufficiently undefined that the concept of cheating is philosophically difficult to establish." "He does that on purpose," she said. "I know," Adrian said. "He's very good at it." There was something in his voice when he said it, something that was not pride in the conventional sense but was adjacent to it, the specific quality of a person recognizing an ability in someone else and finding, to their genuine surprise, that recognition produces warmth rather than assessment. She had handed him his coffee and gone back to the counter. The conversation about his father happened in month 6, in the car after she'd picked Noah up from Adrian's building on a Saturday afternoon. One of the 6 Saturdays she'd permitted by then, each one negotiated on its own terms. Each one a first thing rather than a precedent. Noah was asleep in the back. She was driving. Adrian was in the passenger seat because his car was in for maintenance and it was practical, and she had stopped policing the reasons she allowed practical things. "Tell me," she said. He'd known what she meant. He told her. All of it, in the flat clinical way that she'd learned was not actually clinical, was not the absence of feeling, but the presence of a feeling so large and so structural that direct language was the only containment available. He told her about Silvio Vescari, who'd been a man of formidable intelligence and zero sentimentality, who had built a network from functional nothing over 30 years by treating every relationship, including familial ones, as an asset to be managed for organizational benefit. He told her about growing up in the specific atmosphere of that, the love that was there, genuine and real, and the way it coexisted with an assessment of you as a resource rather than a person, the way those two things could be simultaneously true in someone, and the specific damage it produced. He told her that he had spent 18 months believing his father had been murdered. He told her that learning the opposite had not in the end produced grief in the way he had expected, had produced instead a kind of retroactive reordering of a history he thought he understood, every data point resettling into a new configuration that was more accurate and more costly than the old one. She listened. She did not say that it would be okay or that it made sense or any of the things people say to fill the space around pain. She drove and she listened, and when he was finished, she said, "You're not him." He was quiet. "I know you know that," she said. "I also know that knowing it and believing it are different things, and that believing it takes longer than a sentence in a car." She kept her eyes on the road. "But I'm telling you anyway, you're not him." He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "I know." And she believed him. Not because he said it, because the evidence of who he was in the current tense was available to her in small, specific things. In the patience with the card game, in the way he'd handed Daravoss the gun, in the phone call from the truck before he knew the worst, before there was anything to gain from it. She believed him because the believing was available to her, and she was choosing, one Tuesday at a time, to let it be. On the anniversary of the morning, Tuesday, raining, the kind of rain that rattled the awnings and turned the gutters into rivers, Adrian walked into the cafe at 9:15. He was alone. He was not carrying anything except 3 cups of coffee in a paper carrier from the shop 2 doors down, which was its own kind of statement, bringing coffee into a cafe, and she looked at it when he set it on the counter in front of her and said, "You know I have an espresso machine." "Yours was occupied," he said. It was. She'd been running 4 drinks simultaneously. She looked at the 3 cups. She looked at him. He looked back with the expression she'd been learning to read over 14 months. Not the locked room and not the underneath, but a third thing she hadn't had a name for at the beginning and was beginning to have a name for now. A thing that was present and specific and his and nobody else's. The face of a man who has come through something and knows it and has chosen what to carry out of it. "That one's yours," he said, indicating the cup on the left. "Noah's is the one with the lid, I assumed." "He spills," she said. "I know, he told me." He paused. "At length." She picked up her cup. Behind her, the cafe was doing its particular Tuesday morning thing. The couple at 4, the man at the counter with the newspaper he wouldn't finish. The espresso machine. Darnell doing whatever Darnell did with enough controlled noise to suggest productivity without demonstrating it. The window table was taken by a woman with a laptop who'd been there since 7 and had nursed the same latte for 90 minutes. Ordinary. Loud and particular and unremarkable and ordinary. Noah came through the kitchen door. He'd been in the back saying something urgent to Darnell about the muffin display, a position he held strong opinions on, and stopped when he saw Adrian at the counter and grinned with the completeness that 6-year-olds grin when something good and expected occurs. He climbed onto the bar stool. He reached for the cup with the lid. "That's for you," Adrian said. "Is it hot chocolate?" "It's hot chocolate." Noah looked at it, and then at Adrian with the assessment of a person who has opinions about hot chocolate and is determining whether his specifications were met. "Did you tell them no whip?" "I told them no whip." Noah examined the lid. "There's whip." "There is," Adrian said. "I said no whip." "You said no whip." "I relayed no whip." The execution was outside my control. Noah considered this, apparently found the legal reasoning sufficient, and drank the hot chocolate with whip. Serena leaned on the counter with her cup and looked at the two of them, man and boy, the boy scraping whipped cream off the inside of the lid with his finger, the man watching him do it with the specific expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of ordinary happiness, which was not loud and was not performed and was entirely real. Outside the window, the rain came down. The city moved past it, umbrellas, coffee cups, the specific urgent drift of people with places to be, all of it continuous and uninterested in the small cafe on the corner where, 1 year ago today, Three people's lives had been permanently reorganized by a spilled cup of coffee and a child who ran at strangers. She looked at Adrian. He was already looking at her. "You're making it wrong," Noah said, without looking up from his hot chocolate. "I'm not making anything," Adrian said. "I brought it from down the street." "That's what you always say," Noah said. "Mom says that's your excuse." She had in fact said that. She pressed her lips together. Adrian looked at her. She held his gaze. What passed between them in that moment was not a resolution. There were too many remaining complications for resolution. Too many Tuesday mornings still required. Too many first things not yet arrived at. Too many conversations still in queue for the nights when Noah was asleep, and the cafe was locked, and they were two adults in the specific uncomfortable proximity of a shared history and an uncharted future. What passed between them was something more modest and more durable than resolution. It was recognition. The recognition of two people who have been through the worst of a thing together and are still standing in the same room, still choosing the same direction, still willing to be in the specific difficulty of whatever comes next. She looked away first. She looked at Noah, who had finished the hot chocolate and was now asking Adrian if they had time to play cards before the lunch rush. And Adrian was saying that depended on her, and Noah was already turning to her with the full deployment expression of a child who is about to make a case that he believes is strong and is preparing to deliver it at maximum effectiveness. She looked at the cafe, her cafe, the one with the aging equipment and the 2 years on the lease and the 3 items she'd added to the menu and the wall in the corner that Noah had painted 14 times, and then back at her son. 20 minutes, she said. Noah was off the bar stool before she finished the sentence. He went to the corner booth. He climbed in. He looked at Adrian with the expression of someone who has already planned his opening strategy and is waiting for the other player to sit down so the game can begin. Adrian picked up his coffee and walked to the corner booth and sat across from Noah, and the deck of cards appeared from somewhere. Noah's jacket, probably. He'd been carrying them for months. And the game began. She turned back to the counter. She picked up her cup. Outside, the rain continued. The city rushed past, indifferent and enormous, and entirely unaware that in a small cafe on a corner in Capitol Hill, a woman who had spent 7 years rebuilding herself from the specific rubble of grief and necessity was standing at a counter she owned for the first time in her life, watching her son play cards with a man who had dismantled a criminal empire because it was the only honest thing left to do. And that all three of them, imperfect and marked by everything they'd survived, carrying the specific weight of 7 years of wrong turns and constructed lies and the long, ordinary work of coming through it, had arrived together at the unremarkable and extraordinary fact of a Tuesday morning with nothing more required of them than to be in it. Every secret had been brought to light, every debt had been named and either paid or surrendered. Every wound was still in the process of healing, the way wounds actually heal,